book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is The Second, Race and Guns in a Fatally Unequal America by Carol Anderson. This is from the introduction. It was like a snuff film, that July 6, 2016 live stream. Philando Castile sat in his car, buckled in, bleeding, dying. "Why did you shoot him, sir?" asked his fiancée, Diamond Reynolds, pain piercing her every word. Castile, who had been pulled over in a suburb of St. Paul, Minnesota, because his, quote, wide-set nose, end quote, supposedly resembled that of a robbery suspect, had been reaching for his ID, but in order to avoid any surprises, let the police officer know he had a gun with him, a legally permitted, right-to-carry concealed gun. That was all the cop needed to know. Officer Geronimo Yanez began shooting. Castile's death came just one day after Alton Sterling's down in Louisiana. He, too, was carrying a gun, which was not unusual in this right-to-carry state. Granted, Sterling had a felony conviction, so owning a firearm was, for him, illegal, but he had been robbed before and wanted protection. On July 5, 2016, the Baton Rouge police received a 911 call that there was a man with a weapon threatening customers at a local convenience store. As officers rolled onto the scene, they saw Sterling sitting there, selling CDs and DVDs, just as the store owner allowed him to do and indeed welcomed. The threatening man was not Sterling. In fact, there was no threatening man. It had been a prank call, but that didn't matter. Within a few minutes, police had thrown the black man down, pinned him to the asphalt, and then started yelling that Sterling had a gun. He did. It was in his pocket where he could hardly reach it, what with the officers squatting on both his legs and one arm. Nevertheless, the police began firing round after round into his prone body, point blank. Blood poured out of his chest. But not for long. Alton Sterling was dead. The back-to-back deaths of these two black men police had shot for carrying guns should have jolted into action the Second Amendment's staunchest advocate, the National Rifle Association. In 1995, for example, the organization's denunciations flew fast and furious when it contended that law enforcement not only overreacted, but went out of its way to kill gun owners. Angered by the deaths at the Branch Davidian compound in Waco, Texas, and the siege and firefight at Ruby Ridge, Idaho, both of which were sparked by federal agents serving warrants for weapons violations, Wayne LaPierre, the NRA's executive vice president, angrily wrote, quote, "If you have a badge, you have the government's go-ahead to harass, intimidate, and even murder law-abiding citizens," end quote. He further denounced cops as, quote, "jackbooted government thugs who have more power to take away our constitutional rights, break in our doors, seize our guns, destroy our property, and even injure or kill us." Nearly 2 decades later, that sentiment had not changed. This was evident when Nevada rancher Cliven Bundy, who had refused to pay over $1 million in fees for grazing his cattle on public land, summoned his gun-toting, self-styled militiamen to do battle with federal authorities to prevent the seizure of his herd for restitution. Richard Mack, a former recipient of the NRA's Law Enforcement Officer of the Year award, asserted, "If federal agents are going to start killing people, I'm sorry, but to show the world how ruthless these people are, women and children need to be placed in the front lines as human shields." Mack didn't flinch as he insisted, quote, "Women need to be the first ones shot. I would have put my own wife or daughter there on the front lines, and I would have been a screaming bloody murder to watch them die," end quote. Larry Pratt, a speaker at the NRA's 2014 National Convention, commenting on the fact that Bundy, quote, backed them, the Bureau of Land Management agents, down with automatic rifles and other deadly weaponry, proudly called that armed confrontation, quote, "a proper, legitimate, lawful response to illegitimate, unlawful exercise of government power, particularly on the federal level," end quote. Yet how quickly the NRA's swagger disappeared when government agents gunned down Philando Castile and Alton Sterling for merely carrying guns. Sterling's death didn't even merit acknowledgement. As for Castile, the NRA broke its silence only after inordinate pressure from African-American members led the gun manufacturers' lobby to issue a tepid statement that the Second Amendment was applicable, quote, regardless of race, religion, or sexual orientation. When pressed further by many of its members to stand up for Castile, the often fierce organization demurred, saying it was, quote, important for the NRA not to comment while the investigation is ongoing. This situational silence did not go unnoticed. The NRA had not only loudly defended the rights of those of the Branch Davidian cult and at Ruby Ridge, men who had actually shot and killed members of law enforcement, but the organization had also doubled down on calling for more guns in the face of mass shootings in a public school in Newtown, Connecticut, and a movie theater in Aurora, Colorado. Yet here, the guardian of the Second Amendment was now deliberately ignoring the inconvenient fact that black men had been killed for merely possessing a firearm. Where's the NRA? Asked journalist Hannah Cowper.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Well, happy International Teachers Day. It's the algorithm, stupid. Frances Haugen has been testifying before Congress for the last couple of hours, and it's a pretty shocking picture she's painting of Facebook. We'll get into that in just a moment. I've got a rant about that we published today at Hartmann Report titled, "It's the Algorithm Stupid," about how what started out as a pleasant view of Aunt Sally's summer vacation ends up with a bloody police officer on the floor of the U.S. Capitol and democracy in flames. Also, I want to get into the question in this first hour, is it okay to follow, in this case, Kyrsten Sinema, but really any politician, into the bathroom to ask them questions because they're refusing to hold town halls, they're refusing to meet with constituents, they're refusing to take, where are the lines here? And your thoughts on that. In the second hour, Jake Weigler is going to drop by. He's with a group here in Portland, or here in Oregon, that has begun to identify politicians that they believe are actually harming public health, harming the public good, in this case, in the context of COVID. And it's a fascinating story. And you're going to want to hear this in the second hour of the program. In the third hour of the program, we're going to do a deep dive. The whole hour is going to be Conversations with Great Minds with Frances Moore Lappe, the author. It's the 50-year anniversary of her book, Diet for a Small Planet. There's a new edition out. And she does a deep dive, not just into diet, but also into politics, into democracy, into the consequences of how we eat for the planet as well as for our bodies. And I think you're going to find that an absolutely fascinating conversation. That'll be our third hour. But I want to start out with the algorithm. And, basically my story of the story that Frances Haugen has been telling to Congress. I think they just wrapped up, in fact. And let me start with the difference between cocaine and crack cocaine. You can actually online buy coca leaf to make tea out of. Right? There's a little tiny bit of cocaine in it. They've, in South America, in the Andes, in the mountains of South America, they've been chewing coca leaf and making coca tea for millennia, for thousands of years. Basically the same way that people in India and Southwest Asia have been using, well, actually across Southern Asia, have been using tea as a source of caffeine. It's just a very mild stimulant. However, if you extract that cocaine from the coca leaf, concentrate it, and then treat it with baking soda, alkalize it, change its pH, it becomes something known as free base. Base means alkaline. It becomes free base crack cocaine. We see the same thing, by the way, because it sticks by changing its pH. What you've done is you've converted the cocaine into a compound that sticks very quickly to blood cells and therefore gets to the brain really fast and hits the nervous system, wham, like that. And the more rapid you can produce a high, the more addictive the substance will become over time. It's the same thing with tobacco in the United States. American tobacco companies for years have added ammonia to tobacco. Why? Because it alters the pH of the nicotine, which makes the nicotine hit the bloodstream faster. So cigarettes in the United States are like crack cigarettes in many other countries. Although around the world, many tobacco companies do the same thing. It's the same reason why they put sugar in children's cereals, right? Is that sudden rush. So and there's a reason why we respond this way. I mean, anytime we're confronted by shocking or novel stimuli, it causes a very rapid release in our brain of certain chemical neurotransmitters, particularly dopamine, but also adrenaline. That comes out of our adrenal glands over our kidneys. That give us a very weak high by increasing our alertness and stimulating the reward centers of our brain. And evolution built this into us for a reason. There's a reason why if we see a tiger when we're out, 10,000 years ago, out walking around in the forest, and you see a tiger and realize that it lives in that particular part of the forest, that makes a much bigger impression on your brain than noticing where a squirrel lives. Because that tiger, if you don't know where that tiger lives, you might blunder into there and he will eat you. I mean, this is literally evolution wired us to have strong emotional and thereby, intellectual, cognitive connections to things that produce a strong emotional response, including fear, but also anger, rage, outrage. I mean, just the whole spectrum of emotions. So, how does this apply to social media? Okay, Uncle Ralph and Aunt Sally go to the beach and have their vacation. They take some pictures of their vacation. They post those pictures on a social media site. Let's say that, you've got the ocean, you've got the beach, you've got Uncle Ralph, you got Aunt Sally. Aunt Sally's wearing an old, 2000 Bush Cheney t-shirt. So now the computer algorithm, the brain in the machine, looks at this picture or reads this story and says to itself, what do I want to emphasize about this and push out to other people? Do I push out other pictures of Uncle Ralph for people who saw this and thought it was interesting? Oh, you want more of Ralph? Here he is. Here's when he was with an army buddy 10 years ago. Or do you want more pictures of Aunt Sally? Or do you want pictures of people on a beach or taking vacations? Do you want to push those out? Or do you want to take Aunt Sally's t-shirt and say, oh, Bush Cheney, let's link to a page about how Bush and Cheney were president and vice president when those Muslims hit us on 9/11. And then that will link to a page about how those Muslims are actually, evil people who want to destroy America and they're coming for your town. And then that will link to a page that says, and not only that, the Democrats like them. And then that'll link to a page that says, and those Democrats are drinking the blood of children. And pretty soon, when you wake up from this social media-induced high, you wake up on the floor of the U.S. Capitol with a bloody flagpole in your hand and a cop, unconscious on the floor in front of you. I mean, that's literally what has happened here. It's the algorithm, stupid. The algorithm is the mathematical formula, the piece of computer code that has been tweaked and tweaked and tweaked and tweaked and tweaked to try to do what's called drive engagement. By taking the most inflammatory pieces of content and pushing them as far as possible to as many people as possible. Whether it's politically inflammatory, whether it's socially inflammatory, whether it's the stuff that is like, whoa, teenagers looking at body image issues and posts and rants and, the promotion of anorexia, or whether it's the promotion of left or right. I don't know where left politics gets real violent these days. I mean, the SDS, the Weather Underground has been gone for a long, long time. But, whatever. Pushing the extremes. Now, it doesn't have to be this way, right? The algorithms don't have to make these kinds of decisions, just like people who harvest coca leaf don't need to process it with baking soda to make crack cocaine, and tobacco companies don't need to add ammonia to cigarettes to make them 10 or 20 times more addictive, and the big cereal companies don't need to add sugar to cereal. But they all do it because it increases their profits. It gets people addicted, and that's what these algorithms are doing for these social media companies. And this is not rocket science. It's not that hard to rewrite the algorithm to say, if it's Uncle Ralph and Aunt Sally's vacation, how about some more pictures of Uncle Ralph and Aunt Sally? Or some more stories about them or people related to them? Or how about some more stories about nice vacations? Rather than finding the one piece that might be tweaked to be inflammatory. The problem is that kind of a social media algorithm, while it would build a nice place to go keep track of family and friends, and would make money, it's a profitable business model, would not turn its founders into some of the most wealthy people on the planet. It would merely turn them into multimillionaires or billionaires. And it looks to me like that's what's going on right here. The algorithm is the key to the profitability, and it's the key to the societal damage that social media is doing. In this case, specifically talking about Facebook, but more generally, I mean, this is, it's funny, Facebook has been running ads recently saying, please regulate us. I'm saying, yeah, good plan. Let's start out by mandating transparency in algorithms. And begin at that point. Because that's where, that is the unique difference between like just a website that posts stuff, a blog, a message board, and a system that drives rage, basically. What say you?
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Do you know people who have been radicalized by social media? Have you had this, brushes with this? Do you have suggestions on how it could be fixed? In my op-ed today, I draw a parallel between the founders of some of these social media sites and the Sackler family. The Sackler family, they had this company, Purdue Pharma, and they could have sold just, normal run-of-the-mill painkillers or even developed some new painkillers that were not wildly addictive. But, and they had, apparently, from the news stories I've read, I'm not an expert on this, but, it's been all over the newspapers. They had available to them a wide variety of drugs that they could be promoting or not, or choosing not to promote. But they chose to promote the hell out of OxyContin. Why? Well, because it was insanely profitable and people got addicted to it and they bought more and more and more of it and they took larger and larger doses of it, which is exactly what's happening with social media. And I'm not saying do away with social media or anything like that. What I'm saying is that it could be tamed. It could be made less destructive to us in our society. In fact, I think that you could build a case that, in the context of social media, that it's even a utility. It is social media has become part of the infrastructure of our lives. And, I mean, if somebody wanted to create a social media product that was, where people knew that they were going to encounter outrageous content, well, arguably that already exists with, the alt-right message boards or 4chan and 8chan and things like that. And if somebody wanted to create a site where you just knew that it was just going to be friends and family, you could do that. It wouldn't, however, turn you into the richest person on earth or one of them. And I think that there's just this very real, clear distinction. Oh, and now the social media companies are looking at kids. I mean, this has become like the Joe Camel of online media. And I think it's just a very, very dangerous thing. Linda in Matlock, Washington. Hey, Linda, what's up?
Hello, Tom. I want to suggest a book that also ties in very nicely with your rant on the social media and the fact that they have decided and really, really manufactured a real dopamine crisis here. The title of the book is Dopamine Nation by Dr. Anna Lemke. She's a psychiatrist.
But continue.
Yes. She's a psychiatrist at the Dual Diagnosis Clinic from Stanford University and works with people with psychiatric issues and addiction. And she does a wonderful expose not only on substances, but she also goes into the fact that we are a nation of 24/7, addicted to the internet, addicted to food, sex, work. And it is written very well.
And if I recall, she also talks about media, how television drives this as well.
Yes, I heard her and had to get the book because it really took a lot of stuff that people aren't unaware of. In fact, she said you don't need to do a study of the effects. She said just go outside and look around, see people.
Yeah.
They're all stuck to their phone.
There you go. Yeah, they're glued to their phones.
The algorithm should not be intellectual property. It's
I
a
agree.
math problem.
I agree. I think that's the key to the whole thing. It's the algorithm stupid, yeah. Linda, thank you. Thank you for the call. Dopamine Nation is that book. We'll be right back. Stick around. Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. You know, it's like increasingly we're all addicted to dopamine. Dopamine is one of the reward chemicals that, gives us a little bit of a buzz. We get increased levels of dopamine from drinking alcohol. We get it from drinking coffee. We get it from cocaine. We get it from opiates, although there's a whole bunch of other chemicals that are probably more impacting us even more. We get it from watching TV, particularly programs that engage or enrage us. You watch a Bruce Willis movie, right? You are filled with dopamine as you're walking out of the theater. And I just had a caller who was talking about this book, Dopamine Nation, and spot on. That is what, and in fact, the whistleblower this morning on TV, Frances Haugen, she referenced that, that we're constantly pushing that dopamine button, that's what social media is trying to do. So, there's that, and like I said, if you have. See, I've had so many people call into this program and talk about how particularly their parents or friends of theirs got radicalized by Fox News. Do you know anybody who's been radicalized by Facebook or by any other social media? Do you see or not see this as a problem in other social media? For example, on LinkedIn, I don't see this kind of thing happening. On Nextdoor Neighbor, I think it's neighbor.com or neighborhood.com. I forget what it is, but it's the Nextdoor Neighbor app that, pretty much every neighborhood in America is now a lot of people are wired into. Instead of pushing out the outrageous content, it's just like, it's kind of a chronological scroll. Oh, here's what got posted. The founders of those companies are probably not going to be the world's richest billionaire. Facebook is approaching being worth $1 trillion. And meanwhile, in Ethiopia right now, the country's on the verge of civil war because of Facebook. Or at least it's alleged, and this came out in the hearings this morning. And in Myanmar, the former Burma, the junta actually used Facebook to encourage locals to slaughter Rohingya people, this ethnic minority, this Muslim ethnic minority, encouraged the slaughter of the Rohingya, and it happened. It worked. There was a genocide that happened that was almost entirely driven on and by Facebook. And it was, put together intentionally by these generals who had figured this thing out, how to manipulate Facebook. This is dangerous stuff, and it has the potential. And frankly, now we're hearing that January 6th was planned on Facebook. Okay, that's number one. Number two, Kyrsten Sinema. This group, Living United for Change in Arizona, Lucha, L-U-C-H-A. A couple of their members followed Kyrsten Sinema into a ladies' room, into the restroom in Arizona. Sinema had been teaching a class at the university there. It was a sealed building, and somehow they got into the building and they got into the ladies' room, and confronted her. Said, will you I forget the phrase. It was either will you commit to reconciliation or will you commit to ending the filibuster so that the Dreamers can get citizenship, basically. And one of these people is like at risk of being deported. And that risk might have radically increased after they confronted Senator Sinema. So And then the same thing happened on the airplane yesterday as Sinema was flying back to D.C. Somebody came up to her, a dreamer, a woman who identified herself as Karina, and said, "Senator, how are you? I'm Karina. I'm just wondering if you could commit as my senator, if you could commit it to passing reconciliation that would provide a pathway for citizenship to immigrants." And Sinema was, basically kind of blew her off. But, and Chuck Schumer was asked about this. And his response basically was, first of all, Sinema said it's unacceptable for activists organizations to instruct their members to jeopardize themselves by engaging in unlawful activities, such as gaining entry to closed university buildings, disrupting learning environments, and filming students in a restroom. Okay, point made. I'm sorry, it wasn't Schumer, it was Biden was asked about this yesterday afternoon. And he said, this stuff happens. What is it appropriate to follow a senator or member of Congress into the bathroom when they refuse to hold town hall meetings, refuse to meet with their constituents, refuse to meet with their constituents in their offices unless those constituents have large piles of cash, when basically the only constituents they will meet with are the ones who are doing the fundraisers, which appears to be the case. And maybe I'm wrong about this if you're from Arizona, and I am wrong about it, and you have been to a Kyrsten Sinema town hall in the last year, call in and let me know. But, what alternative do people have? Where do we go from here? And how best do you think social media can be used? I would love to see Facebook turn back into Facebook, right? Although I get it that it was originally designed for college dorm guys to rape girls. I get it. That's where it came from. And that's still largely what it's being used for. But I would love to see it turn into a friends and family kind of place. I realize it wouldn't be as profitable, but it might be a good thing.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
So what has your experience of that been? And how has it changed or improved or hurt your life? Back with your calls on this.
Our book club book for today is Talk Radio's America by Brian Rosenwald, subtitled How an Industry Took Over a Political Party That Then Took Over the United States. This is from the introduction. August 1, 1988 marked the beginning of the long road to President Donald Trump. But even political junkies took little notice of the fateful events that unfolded that day as a failed disc jockey and former Kansas City Royals executive named Rush Hudson Limbaugh III made his national radio debut. Only a small audience tuned in. So poorly commemorated was the moment that we don't even know how many stations broadcast day one of Limbaugh's syndicated program. Limbaugh claims the show began on 56 affiliates, while other counts range from 57 and 87. From the beginning, the show was brash, entertaining, controversial, and boundary-pushing. Before Limbaugh, this sort of programming did not exist outside major cities. In 1983, there were just 59 talk radio stations nationwide, and the program on many of those stations consisted of advice shows, staged interviews, and caller-driven discussions of everything from neighborhood schools to abominable snowmen. Most talk radio programming focused on local concerns, and most of the industry's stars, such as Larry King and Sally Jesse Raphael, had left-of-center views but rarely shared them. At the time of Limbaugh's national debut, talk radio had negligible political impact. In talk radio hotbeds such as Boston, hosts might influence local and statewide policy debates, especially on visceral issues such as seatbelt laws. But talk radio was not a partisan force, and it had no role in national politics. In fact, the wall-to-wall conservative political talk stations that dominate the AM airwaves today were impossible until 1987, thanks to a regulation called the Fairness Doctrine. That year, however, the Federal Communications Commission eliminated the policy, which required broadcasters of opinionated programming on controversial issues to offer an array of viewpoints. In this more permissive environment, Limbaugh would go on to revolutionize the radio business. In doing so, he helped unintentionally to spawn a major new political player. Within a decade, the broadcast format he inaugurated aired on more than 1,000 stations and kept millions company as they commuted, worked, and shouted back at their radios. It took just a few years before conservative talk radio began to influence national politics and public policy. That influence only grew throughout the decades as the business changed. Over the course of the 1990s and early 2000s, the number of nationally syndicated talk shows rose dramatically, and the content of talk radio programs became increasingly political and conservative. Liberal pundits and some scholars agree on the broad outlines of the story. Conservative station executives, conspiring with their Republican allies, built a format modeled on Limbaugh's program, and thousands of Limbaugh wannabes cropped up all over the country. Executives, hosts, and politicians turned talk radio into an appendage of the Republican Party, using the platform to get Republicans elected and advance the party's agenda. The success of talk radio led to the development of partisan and ideological cable news networks, and some hosts complemented their radio shows with primetime cable programs. Eventually, this content found a home in the new digital sphere, with equally strident cheerleaders proliferating on blogs and other online publications. This narrative makes sense, especially to liberals. After all, many conservative media executives and their corporate political action committees donate to Republican candidates, and most hosts champion conservative candidates and causes. But this narrative is wrong. In reality, the story of talk radio's emergence as a popular conservative format and the impact it had on American politics weaves together two, But this narrative is wrong. In reality, the story of talk radio's emergence as a popular conservative format and the impact it had on American politics weaves together two distinct, complex tales. Neither has anything to do with the conspiracy to create a media servant of the Republican Party. The first describes how talk radio spread across America, in the process saving AM radio from financial ruin. Limbaugh had no intention of affecting elections or legislation, and no inkling that he could. Nor did any of his early successors. The executives who gave these hosts a chance also had no interest in political outcomes. Hosts and their bosses were in business. They wanted to captivate listeners and make money, and they discovered, essentially by accident, that conservative political talk in the mouth of an entertaining personality achieved this. Conservative hosts had strong opinions, but their primary goal was, and still is, financial gain. And it is because they realized financial gain that more and more stations invested in their style and content while divesting from competing formats. The second story concerns talk radio's transformation after 1995 into an almost entirely conservative and doctrinaire medium that eventually spawned successors in other media, took over the Republican Party, and reshaped it in hosts' and listeners' image. Limbaugh was a great innovator, but he didn't change American media and politics all at once or on his own. In conservative talk radio's early days, hosts shared stations with liberal talkers and apolitical programs. There was not an immediate sense that conservative radio was the future either. But gradually, its success snowballed thanks to trial and error in the radio business, regulatory changes, political events, happenstance, and most importantly, listener behavior. Hosts also got a boost from marginalized conservative Republican politicians who realized that talk radio would enable them to circumnavigate the mainstream media, and deliver their message directly to voters. The book, Talk Radio's America.
Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Just to put a punctuation mark on this, and then I'll pick up your phone calls here. And this is in a study entitled Carol's Journey to QAnon, a test user study and misinformation and polarization risks, or of misinformation and polarization risks encountered through recommendation systems. That's the title of the study. This was done internally by Facebook at Facebook. And what they did is they set up a couple of brand new dummy accounts, and they had them follow, quote, high quality or verified conservative interest pages, pages like Fox News or Donald Trump or Melania Trump. The study found that, and this is a quote from the study, within just one day, page recommendations had already devolved toward polarizing content. Within 2 days, Recommendations began to include conspiracy content. The report found, quote, it took less than 1 week to get a QAnon recommendation. This is one of the realities that were laid out by Facebook product manager Frances Haugen with the Securities and Exchange Commission in a complaint that she filed with the SEC this week that CBS was talking about yesterday. So, fascinating stuff. Renee in St. Louis, Missouri. Hey, Renee, what's on your mind today?
Okay. Hi, Tom. Great show as always. Always a good topic.
Thank you.
Okay, so on the question in reference, should you approach your Congress people or, when you see them out in public, the answer for me is yes. I have found that to be successful because I'm very polite, I go up and I make my point. Okay, and they should have an answer to your question.
Yeah, I'm completely with you on that. But what do you do when they never make themselves publicly available? I mean, in this case, this group chased Kyrsten Sinema into a bathroom. And, traditionally, that's kind of a place where there's at least a sense of privacy.
She should have been able to answer their questions. That would not have happened. She put herself in that position.
I'm inclined to agree with you, Renee. I think that...
Right. She put herself in that position. Now, unfortunately, she decided to run up into the bathroom instead of just answering the question.
No, I think she was actually using the bathroom.
Okay, whatever.
I'm not sure, but, they said they were talking to her while she was in the stall. Maybe she's trying to hide from them. I don't know.
Exactly. And she's been known to do that.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's not a good. Now, second thing, on the algorithm, my very first class in computer programming, now this is the old languages, Fortran, Basic, COBOL. Okay, the old languages. First day the professor says, I want you all to understand why the worldwide internet is being introduced to the American public. This is going to allow the government to be able to monitor the citizen, and the citizens are going to be thinking that they're doing it of their own free will because they're giving this information up willingly.
Yeah, it turns out it wasn't the government. It was a billionaire named Mark Zuckerberg.
Oh, okay, so he figured out a way to make money off of that program.
Right.
Okay, and yeah, that's the way the algorithm works. So now that you know that, be careful of the information that you leave. Yeah. Also, the government already started tracking you when you were born because that was your Social Security number. Get over it, people. Yeah. Don't do stupid stuff that attracts attention.
Well, I can't disagree with that broadly, but I think that, if it's necessary to do stuff that attracts attention for a good cause, that's not a bad thing. But with regard to the algorithm, I mean, this is the problem, is that, if you post on one kind of social media site, like this next door neighbor site, that so many people are members of around the country, you basically are just seeing things that get posted in the order in which they get posted. If you post on other social media sites, particularly Facebook, you can find yourself very rapidly being pushed into entirely new directions and having groups recommended to you, and pretty soon you're in wild conspiracy land.
So now you're able to make a more educated decision about what sites you don't want to be on.
Yeah.
Stay off of Facebook.
Yeah, I'm with you. Renee, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot for the call. Morris in Long Beach, California. Hey, Morris, thanks for listening to KPFK. What's up?
Check this out now. I don't know if you watch sports, Professor, because you read a lot. A lot of people, when they read, they don't watch sports. But I watch sports and I read too. And I know this. When you have a sporting event, after that game, you have to go before the press. Now, maybe you Barry Bonds or maybe you whoever you might be. It might not be a good conversation, okay? But you got to go before the press. And the commissioner going to make darn sure, I didn't curse, that you go before the press and make them comments, and they get to come at you. Now, if you want to play this game, what I call the avoidance game, not answer to what your activities are, what you're doing, no problem. Then we got a license to follow you into the toilet, into the bedroom, into the kitchen, where you dine, where you socialize. Now, normally those places will be off limit. There'll be a place for you to handle your business, right, to go ask them kind of questions. But again, they want to play the avoidance game. So, yeah, I think you should be able to go anywhere them people are if they refuse to answer your question. And thank you for this time. You're
welcome, Morris. Thank you. Very, very, very well done. Very well said. Denise in Calumet, Michigan. Hey, Denise, what's up?
Hi. I was flicking through channels at 3 o'clock this morning because I couldn't sleep. Found this. There was a DVD on the screen, and it said COVID-19 When Science Lies, and it was just really ridiculous.
Really?
It was, I figured out it was an evangelistic channel, and that was the gift they got if they supported that, if they sent in money for pledges. And it was how to get lawyers if you get COVID. It was everything about COVID is a lie. You don't have to mask. You don't have to distance. I couldn't believe it. I watched it long enough to figure out what it was, and I got off that station.
Wow.
But it
was this on local air, or was this over a cable system or something?
It was on DirecTV on a channel called Daystar.
Huh.
And
Amazing.
I didn't, they were just like preaching, what the evangelistic people believe,
So instead of having a social media algorithm pushing vaccine misinformation to you, you now have a television network that is doing it with just generic advertising. They're just allowing an advertiser to push it, probably thinking that advertiser is just some church that's going to be hustling people for money.
Right, and giving away a DVD about that's just nothing but a big lie.
Fascinating.
And the thing on Christian cinema, I believe that if people like her and Joe Manchin were really doing the interests of their constituents, they would want to see their people, talk to their people. But a lot of these people learned from the Republicans not to have, that's who started not having the, town hall meetings and stuff. And they're following suit. And so they deserve to be talked to. People are tired of not hearing from them and not being heard.
Yeah.
And so they're getting desperate to find a way to talk to their people who promised them when they were running for election that they would do for them whatever it is they wanted done.
Yeah. Yeah.
So they're tired of the false promises.
Yeah, I'm completely with you. Thank you. Thank you,
Okay.
Denise. Great points all. Diana in Ventura, California. Hey, Diana, what's up?
Hey, Tom. I was just hearing your comment, and I'm going to paraphrase you terribly here, but something about the effect of Facebook was created for college dorm guys to take advantage of dorm women.
To
or
specifically rate
something.
them based on their appearance or how easy they were to get into bed. I mean, if you, I'm basing this on having watched the movie about Mark Zuckerberg and the creation of Facebook. I think it's called The Social Media.
The social network.
Social network, yeah. I mean, I may be wrong, but I think the movie's based in reality.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I just feel like the discourse in general is super inflammatory, and I felt like that comment in general is inflammatory. And
but if it's
in
true,
general,
are you saying that you don't think that Facebook was created, at Harvard as a way of rating girls? You disagree with that?
I don't think that is a possibly no. Yeah, no, I wouldn't agree with that. I don't know what I think that's just a super inflammatory, overgeneralized statement. I think it's a sensationalistic statement.
I think it's true.
Okay.
I mean, these guys were sitting around in their dorm rooms and trying to figure out, trying to create like I said, a rating system for the girls that they wanted to date or that, that they were interacting with. And and then that became, that became Facebook. I mean, it's like, read the book, watch the movie. It's
Yeah, it's been a very long time since I've seen the movie.
And now what's happened is, it's becoming, like kids are going on there and saying, whatever, here's my performance, with a hula hoop, or here's my thing, or here's my walking on the beach or whatever. And then, how many likes do I get? How much, how am I rated? And if they're not rated well by their peers, if people make snarky remarks or they get thumbs downs or whatever, they get anorexic and suicidal, and if they get lots of thumbs ups, they get addicted to it. They get the dopamine rush off. Oh wow, I'm famous, I'm liked, and it's really, I don't think it's strayed that far from how it really was started.
I'm not contesting the fact that Facebook and all these other things are incredibly divisive and dangerous and sick, and all of that. I'm not contesting that, at all, because I've seen it, evolve, whatever you want to call it. But I think it's important to try and stay as unsensationalistic as possible when we're having these kind of conversations.
Yeah, well, I'm not calling Mark Zuckerberg a predator or anything like that. What I'm saying is that that was the origin of Facebook, to the best of my knowledge, and it still seems like that origin point DNA is still very much part of the DNA of Facebook itself. The whole like system, the whole, yes, I approve of that person, of what that person said, how that person looks, things like that. And I'm just not sure that's a healthy thing.
That style of making that kind of comment with the music and then going out with that, that's just very sensationalistic, and that kind of style of radio.
Okay. Well, if you don't like it, I would encourage you not to call back again.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
It's 46 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with your calls in just a second. And welcome back. Carrie in New Windsor, New York. Hey, Carrie, what's on your mind?
Hi. All right. I'm looking at, it's good to back up your information here. So this news came out, I think, in 2010. But just a reminder, because, everybody was off Facebook for 6 hours, so they might be experiencing some withdrawal symptoms still. So taking advantage of that with the timeliness. He was, according to Gawker.com, who then sources a New Yorker piece, right? A piece from the New Yorker in 2010, says that Facebook CEO admits to calling users, open quote, dumb, F-U blank, blank, blanks. And it says Mark Zuckerberg admits in a New Yorker profile that he mocked early Facebook users for trusting him with their personal information. A youthful indiscretion, the Facebook founder says he's much more mature now at the ripe age of 26. Open quote, they trust me, dash, dumb, F-U blank, blank, blanks. Right. So Zuckerberg in one of the instant messages. So this was, I think, leaked from, it was in a meeting, and he said that in a meeting. So. Yeah.
The movie that I saw, and we've also had conversations with people over the years on this program about, that kind of indicates that there's actually some wisdom to that it's kind of weird and ironic that he would be bragging that people are dumb enough to trust him, but we were all dumb enough to trust him. I mean, it's true.
Well, there's a book that came out about how people's data is more valuable than oil now. Yeah. And it's called I Have Nothing to Hide and 20 Other Myths About Surveillance and Privacy. And it's by a woman named Heidi Bogosian, who co-hosts another show called Law and Disorder. So if people want to check that out and, put duct tape on your selfie cameras, everybody.
I just finished writing a book, The Hidden History of Big Brother, Surveillance in America, Corporate and Government Surveillance in America. And that book will be out in 6 months. And in fact, the galleys just went off. And I did a deep dive into the origin of many of these social media companies, and not just social media, of course. And it's pretty amazing. It's what access, what the information about us that they have access to. And you go back to what Cambridge Analytica did in 2016. I retweeted a little format clip earlier this morning about, with a woman who worked with Cambridge Analytica on the Trump campaign with people from Facebook to drive Donald Trump into the White House. And she comes right out and says, without Facebook, Donald Trump could never have won.
Have you heard of this phrase that I just learned today? Surveillance capitalism.
Yes. Susanna Zuboff, I think, is the creator. She wrote a book by that title. And her point is that they're not just surveilling us; they're building profiles of us, and then using that to predict our behavior as well as to drive our behavior. And we've been using advertising for years to drive behavior, to get people to buy things, but using this data now to predict behavior is a whole brand new kind of brave new world. Carrie, thank you for the call, and thanks for the documentation, for the backup there. We'll be right back. It's 10 minutes before the hour. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. Hey, we've got a new video up over at thomhartmann.com about Big Mail-In. You heard about this? Now, I'm not talking about the George Bernard Shaw play that got made into the movie My Fair Lady and all that kind of stuff. No, this is a PR firm in France. And, when you hear from Americans that, we could never put Donald Trump in jail because only third world countries do that. France is not only not a third world country, they're our oldest ally. And they just convicted their former president for the second time of fraud and corruption around the way he was running his campaigns. Nicolas Sarkozy. They just convicted him a second time. Now, he's appealing both of them. He's, walking around with an ankle bracelet. But, I've got all the details on this video over at thomhartmann.com. You can check it out. But, again, next time somebody says, we can't put Trump in jail, tell them, hey, France did. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. I want to apologize to the woman who we ran up to the break. I mean, in many cases, I can't stop the breaks, but to whom I said, well, if you don't like what I said, just don't call back. I mean, that was snarky, and I apologize for that. Everybody's welcome to call. Michelle in Van Nuys, California, and you're welcome to disagree with me. Michelle in Van Nuys. Hey, Michelle, what's up?
Hi, you were just, when you were talking about people that you've lost to Facebook, I had a friend that I've known since I was 5 years old, and I'm in my 50s now, so a 50-year friendship. And he had moved up to a rural area of Washington some years back, and then I found out that he used to not really be on Facebook. I found out he was on Facebook, plus a 2-hour drive to go to his work, nuclear facility. And all of a sudden, over the last couple of years, he was spouting off all these, he was always, conservative or, what you would say a little bit more right-leaning, but just the things he would say that just echoes of different things. And literally, I haven't spoken to him in almost a year because he started, I'd said something that he disagreed with, and he started, the last 2 times I spoke with him, and he started yelling and screaming at me and hung up on me. And everything, both two different times. And this is somebody that we wouldn't speak every week, but we'd speak every couple of months, but the phone calls were a couple-hour phone calls, so we'd discuss a lot of things.
Right, and you think Facebook radicalized this guy, Michelle?
The Facebook and the right-wing media, the
Fox
the drive, the 2-hour drive every day, so yes.
Oh, yeah.
Yes,
that'll do it.
Yeah, but especially because he never had been on Facebook before, and the anger reaction from him.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was something that I'd never.
Michelle, thank you. Thank you for sharing your story with us. It's got to be a tough one. It's got to be a really tough one. Thank you. Ann in Chicago. Hey, Ann, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I was just listening in when this woman called uncertain about the Facebook and Zuckerberg's initiation of why he started that. And I have a daughter who's 34 years old and went to a Big Ten, and that is exactly when it started and why it started. That was 100%. I would say it was one of the original dating apps, that we have today. So that was the initial intention for
guys in one particular. Actually, I think it was originally in one particular dorm house or frat house or whatever to be rating girls, not be rating one word, to rate girls, R-A-T-E, rate girls in their social sphere.
Yeah, I don't know if it was a particular Greek or a dorm. I just think it was a group of guys, and he was, he initiated. He's quite, he's very intelligent, of course, and so yeah, that was its original intention, and I can't believe that people don't recognize that. That is why he started it. I mean, that is.
Although it had the potential. I'm sorry, I interrupted you.
No, it's fine.
It had the potential to turn into a friends and family kind of place, and the problem, I think, and the reason why Facebook has gotten so large, and other ones like MySpace, and there were a couple of other early ones that were kind of imitators have died out, got just trampled in the competition, is because they were not using an algorithm that was tweaking toward outrage, and Facebook was. Is the way it looks to me. And from the research that I was doing when I was writing the book on the hidden history of Big Brother, I'm not the expert on that, but what I'm reading from the experts is that the social media sites that merely, you'd post something, somebody would respond to it, like you see on some of the online sites, Daily Kos, Democratic Underground, these basic sites like that. Where it's not algorithm driven, it's actually user driven. That they could not compete with the stickiness that was created by the algorithm, by the computer driving, just almost an insanity, kind of a foaming at the mouth on the downside, or really embracing, following celebrities or things like that. I mean, there's this whole kind of spectrum of stuff.
I mean, I think it had a purpose at one time. I just think it got lost.
Yeah.
And I think it's a brilliant thing. It just got got lost.
Yeah, and I would love for it to be what it could be. I mean, I keep in touch with my cousins all over the world. I mean, one's down in Mexico, others in Michigan, the rest of my extended family, my brothers and their families, on Facebook. I mean, and I'm quite happy with that, but it's like, please don't feed me crazy stuff about QAnon. And thank you for the call.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More information at HelloFresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery for sleeping and pain relief. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Dinovite, only the best all-natural pet supplements. More info at dinovite.com. Annie's Kit Clubs, creativity delivered right to your door. More info at annieskitclubs.com/Tom. Wild Alaskan Company, delicious, sustainably sourced seafood delivered right to your door. More information at wildalaskancompany.com/Tom. And Mack Weldon, reinventing men's basics. More info at mackweldon.com/Tom.
Book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Francis Moore Lappe's Diet for a Small Planet, 50th Anniversary Edition, just reissued. And this is from the introduction to the 50th Anniversary Edition. It starts out with a quote from George Orwell: "To see what is in front of one's nose needs a constant struggle." I begin this journey with the realization that growing and eating plant-centered diets was a great choice. Today it's a no-contest necessity. Either we now make a big turn, or life on Earth as we know it is gone forever. Whoa, this blunt declaration rocks me. I'll admit it has taken me decades to get here, and I'm delighted now for this opportunity to share my learning journey with you, dear reader. You'll forgive me, though, if my first thoughts are of my own delight, as over the years, strangers have told me, your book changed my life. One story I'll surely never forget is from a friend and longtime head of the Berklee College of Music, Roger Brown. Quote, "I was teaching in a small village in Kenya in 1979 when I came across a tattered version of your book," he told me. "I read it on a mountain by moonlight, and it changed the course of my life." I'm still smiling. When anyone tells me of the book's effect on them, I always have to blurt out, yeah, me too. Diet for a Small Planet started as a one-page handout when I was 26, and it has profoundly shaped my life's quest. Now, in its 50th anniversary, I strive to capture key lessons that help me to this day, and that I hope will help you in these challenging times. Challenging doesn't quite do it. Over the past few years, we have been battling the fiercest storm of my lifetime. Years of attacks on the integrity of our democracy, leading to the first ever citizens' assault on the Capitol, a pandemic deemed the worst in a century, and murders by police that have fueled the Black Lives Matter movement, furthering, we can hope, our nation's long-delayed reckoning with systemic racism. At the same time, our climate crisis nears a tipping point that will drastically hasten destruction. And what first shocked me into action, hunger amid plenty, has gotten worse in recent years, even though the world's food supply offers 1/5 more calories for each of us than it did 50 years ago. Here at home, hunger is also rising. But in a mighty storm, sometimes the biggest tree comes crashing down, and for the first time, we can see its roots. Now is such a storm. So how do we grasp the roots and use what we discover to pull ourselves back from catastrophe and guide us toward life itself? Excuse me. The great news here is that millions in the United States and many more around the world are grasping the root causes of our intertwined crises and remaking their lives in ways aligned with what humans and natures need to thrive. 50 years ago, my youthful aha was that food has special power, as every day our very personal food choices connect us to each other and to all of nature. Shock in discovering the needlessness of hunger triggered in me new ways of seeing what's profoundly amiss in our world and even our power to fix it. Back then, I had no idea how urgent my message would soon become. Driven by tightening corporate power over our democracy, harms from meat-centered agriculture and diets have continued to mount, damaging human health, the natural world, and the climate. And now the ultimate harm. We have destroyed so many species, largely in feeding ourselves, that we face the 6th great extinction of life on Earth. To avoid planetary disaster, warns natural historian David Attenborough, we must allow the reflourishing of life by greatly reducing the land area we farm. And, quote, quickly and the most effective way is to change our diet, end quote. Moving beyond the vast inefficiency of meat-centered eating and choosing plant-centered diets, he projects, would cut in half the land use and still produce plenty of food for all. Now, with vastly more at stake than when my own eyes first opened, it's critical to grasp how we got here. So let's go for those roots. Over the 50 years since I sat in the UC Berkeley Library pondering the root causes of hunger, I've tried to keep digging into the question beneath the question to help me grasp why we humans have messed up so badly. And here's the deepest question my digging has turned up so far. Why are we together creating a world that as individuals none of us would choose? After all, I've never met anyone who gets up in the morning vowing to make another child starve or to turn up the planet's temperature. In the 20th anniversary edition of this book, I introduced the power of ideas to explain what seems inexplicable. I invite you to read my introduction to that edition directly following this one. Today, I express the root challenge this way. While seeing is believing is a common expression, for our species, the reverse is often true. Believing is seeing, or as Albert Einstein put it more directly, it is theory which decides what we can observe. In other words, our internalized filters can blind us to solutions right in front of our noses, requiring precisely the constant struggle George Orwell calls to us in that opening quote. One filter above all blocks us from solutions, a belief that life is still made out of parts, when in truth all life is connected. I can see in my mind's eye the twinkling grin of the late German physicist Hans-Peter Dürr, who a decade ago laid it out to me simply. Frankie, in life there are no parts, only participants. Got it, Hans-Peter, and I've never forgotten, and it is the core truth of our being. The book is the 50th anniversary edition of Diet for a Small Planet by Frances Moore Lappe.
We save life back!
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. By the way, apropos of the previous hour, we just looked up Facebook on Britannica, right? You want to get a relatively unbiased, not even American perspective. You know, Britannica is the encyclopedia based in the UK, Britannica Online. Quote, Facebook began at Harvard University in 2003 as FaceMash, an online service for students to judge the attractiveness of their fellow students. Period. Full stop. So, for what it's worth, anyway, enough of the Facebook stuff. We can continue talking about it, but right now, Jake Weigler is with us. He's the director of Our Shot Oregon and a partner with Praxis Political. OurShotOregon.com is the website. Jake's Twitter handle is Jake Weigler, Weigler. Jake, welcome to the program, or Our Shot Oregon, also on Twitter. Jake, welcome to the program. Tell us about in fact, let me back up a little bit. What provoked you to start this group to basically out politicians in Oregon who are spreading vaccine disinformation and COVID disinformation?
Well, thank you, Tom. We've done some work in our political space. I'm a consultant, so I work on a variety of issues, including a lot of public health issues, have worked on vaccines previously to the pandemic, as well as gun violence prevention. And it's not a unique phenomenon where the vast majority of the public agrees that science and evidence is how we should approach these questions, but you get a very recalcitrant vocal minority that tends to dominate the conversation. They tend to get most of the media coverage. And then there's this very destructive symbiotic relationship between that group of folks and conservative politicians and media outlets that like to feed that narrative. And so I think we've seen a dynamic that's played out for the last several months where we kind of knew that those folks were out there. It was no shock that they were very skeptical of vaccines, actively hostile to social distancing, masking, the other preventative measures we need to take. But we just kind of figured that they were going to do what they're going to do, and hopefully it wasn't going to impact us. And I really saw, and my team as well, over the course of this summer, particularly with the Delta variant, that this was going to be a make or break dynamic for us ending this pandemic, that people refusing to get vaccines, refusing to do the other public health measures we need to do to stop the spread was going to allow for this resurgence and all of these unnecessary deaths. And we said we can do something about it. And I felt like there was a moment that we could capture where the public was really seeing the connections between people having these values and politicians encouraging them to take on these positions and be more vocal about them, and trying to interrupt that process and saying that there should be actually consequences when you are taking anti-science, anti-public health, and you're quite literally killing people. And so we decided to create this movement.
Give me for example.
Provide a banner. Yeah. Well, I think there's an example we put on our website. You may remember last November, before we even had a vaccine, the only step we've had was to take social distancing, and keep our circle small, our bubble small, to protect ourselves and the larger community from spread. And we had a county commissioner here in Oregon who said, well, I'm going to have Thanksgiving and I'm inviting as many people as I can to it, and then got a platform on the Tucker Carlson show, which then, of course, as the evidence is really showing, Fox News is a major driver of this misinformation and this resistance that has emerged, and that person get a lot of kudos. And so that if there's from those corners, and so that if we don't have a movement out there that can provide some negative reinforcement or call them out on it, they're going to continue to double down on that. And unfortunately, I think that's been a dynamic in conservative and Republican politics for decades, whether it's, demonizing LGBTQ people or immigrants or a variety of other targets. They pick someone and said, these people are evil. They're trying to destroy our way of life. It's your job to stand up to them. And until you can flip the political calculus and politicians realize, yeah, I'm talking to 25% of people that love what I'm saying, but the other 75% are getting incredibly turned off by this, they keep doubling down and engage in that behavior. So our hope is that this is a start of changing.
So here in Oregon, we have some politicians, and basically the entire Republican Party, but which is a nationwide problem, And you mentioned, this is a minority. That's true here in Oregon. It's not a minority in Montana, though, or in Idaho, which is melting down right now, and they're trying to ship, dying COVID patients into our Portland hospitals, or into our Oregon hospitals. But you've identified these politicians. What do you do? Tell our listeners how Our Shot Oregon, SHOT, like, getting a vaccine, presumably, OurShotOregon.com. What are you doing? How are you responding to these politicians who are telling lies about vaccines or promoting, bad and risky behavior? And what kind of response have you gotten up to this point from them or from the public?
Well, it was interesting. When we first launched, they asked a bunch of them for comment, and they ducked comment, which to me was indication that we were onto something here. If they knew they'd actually have to defend their approach, and they were refusing to do so, I think they recognized that maybe there's some risks here. And I'll just say Our Shot, yes, it's absolutely about vaccines, but we're also big Hamilton fans. And so we wanted to make a point of, we're not going to miss our shot here to end this pandemic. And that's, I think, really what's motivating us. We are right now, we're a grassroots movement. I've heard the one Republican that did respond, the Senate Republicans were like, this is a shadowy front group for the leftist cabal. And I was like, I wish it was. I wish they were sending us a bunch of resources so we could really mix things up.
You mean George Soros is not pouring money down into your checking account?
I have not heard from George yet, but maybe he's watching the show. Maybe he's going to get out in touch.
You never know.
We would be happy to take it. I know, it's no problem. Literally, I think, we make jokes about it, but thousands of people are dying unnecessarily because of these tactics and these antics. And it's really one of our biggest challenges is to try to keep people engaged and not take ourselves too seriously, but also realize that the stakes here are really high.
Yeah. I'm sorry. Finish your thought.
No, I was just going to say, in terms of what we're trying to do, I think what we're trying to think about as we gain supporters and resources is how we signal back to these politicians that this is not playing well back at home, on the ground. And that could be, putting up some billboards that expose their kind of behavior. I know they think that they love this stuff, but I think that's mainly because it's recycled through the right-wing media, so the only people that are actually hearing it are their base, as well as showing grassroots support. And I analogize to whether it's gun violence prevention or LGBTQ or other kinds of equality issues in our history, or even going back, to segregation. I think, I remember when I was in school, hearing that what really was a changing dynamic in the South was that there was assumption among a lot of white people of, all my neighbors must think the same way. They must really hate black people. And then over time realizing, no, actually, a lot of us do feel differently. And then getting to that critical mass to change that dynamic. And unfortunately, as you said, that's harder in kind of red America right now. But I think that's our job, is to start chipping away at that and building a platform. Because right now, the leaders that would naturally be focused on this are so immersed in the day-to-day response to this pandemic that they don't have the capacity and time to think about how do we create a proactive movement to counterbalance this. And so that's where we said we have some skills we can apply in this situation.
So would you, if you go to OurShotOregon.com, your headline is "Delusional Politicians Are Killing Us." Is what you're trying to do here basically? You've got heroes and villains, right? Is it name and shame? Is it change behavior? All of the above? And do you know of any other groups around the country? There's 50 states here. You and I are just talking about Oregon, that are emulating what you're doing.
I have not seen anybody, and we were joking that it'd be great if we had to franchise into Our Shot Idaho and Our Shot Montana. So if folks are interested, they should come to the website. This is a new idea we hatched a couple weeks ago. And we'd love to find partners outside of Oregon as well. I think there are a lot of people working on the ground to try and deal with vaccine hesitancy and shift public attitudes. And I commend that work. I think it's pretty important, particularly, among BIPOC communities, which we know have had some skepticism in different parts of those communities around kind of the healthcare system and certainly the history of vaccinations in this country. But I think we saw that there was a complementary piece, which, as I mentioned, was that our certain elected officials and their counterparts in kind of the Republican media and right-wing media, they are really the ones broadcasting these messages and telling people on the ground, you should go to that school board meeting and protest, or you should disrupt a public meeting or public setting. And so that if they continue to get that positive reinforcement from leaders, they're going to engage in that behavior because they're getting permission and encouragement to engage in those tactics. And so that unless we go after that dynamic, which frankly, I think a lot of times is bad faith. You know, you look at these evidence from Fox News, everyone there's vaccinated. There was some reports from their newsroom that came out this last week. You saw everyone was wearing a mask. So I think, you know, a lot of this is political theater. You know, we can get into some speculation about their motives for doing so, but I think really trying to change the dynamics of why those folks are engaging in these kind of call outs and encouraging this kind of behavior, that's where we thought we could fit in.
Is there any possible explanation for this? We're talking with Jake Weigler, the director of ourshotoregon.com and a partner with Praxis Political. Is there any possible explanation for this kind of behavior on the part of Republican politicians other than that they want chaos to reign so that Joe Biden and Democrats who are in charge now appear to be at the best impotent and at the worst, you know, fumbling idiots, and you know, and that basically death is their political strategy for 2022 and 2024?
Well, you know, I think we could get into a longer discussion about kind of what does bad faith argumentation mean.
We have 30 seconds now.
You know, looking at Mitch McConnell this week, it's certainly, you know, become part and parcel of how they approach the work. You know, to my mind, a lot of it is a grift, that it's a chance for them to gain money, gain supporters, gain attention, and the consequences be damned. And so I think it has a lot more to do with them seeing a political opportunity to kind of build their clout. And certainly that has come from the top on down for the last several years. And until we accept that that's the dynamic and figure out our counterpoint, I think it's, you know, at our peril, because we come to the conversation's presumption of everyone's in this together. We're all trying to work out the common good and do what's necessary. Unfortunately, other people are playing off a different playbook right now.
Yeah, I get it. Jake Weigler, ourshotoregon.com, excuse me, is the website. And hey, start one in your own state. Contact Jake about how to do it. Jake, thanks a lot for dropping by. It's great talking with you.
Thanks, Tom. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. We'll be right back. It's 18 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Stick around.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
This is so cool when, you know, local groups start these, hey, let's talk about what our politicians are up to. Fascinating. And welcome back. Delane in Houston, Texas. Hey, Delane, what's on your mind today?
How you doing there, sir? I definitely want to talk about how the way I think we need to have a PSA program across the country to actually explain what propaganda is. Because a lot of these here people don't realize their political identity has been weaponized, and actually they don't know how the way that's actually hurting the country when you actually use propaganda to turn a person within themselves on themselves. And that's what's happening, from my point of view. What do you think about having an actual national program to actually get people re-educated what propaganda is?
I think it's brilliant, Delane, and Finland has started this. Pretty sure it was Finland. It might be Denmark, but I'm pretty sure it was Finland. We did a story about it maybe 2-3 months ago here on the program when they rolled it out, that they have rolled out a program starting in, as I recall, like second grade, you know, with 7-year-olds, about how to consume media, basically. Whether you see something on the news, if you see something on TV, if you hear a comment on social media, you hear even somebody, you know, saying something, asserting that something is true. How to determine what's real and what's not. How to be a discriminating user of media and understanding what the difference is between propaganda and news, what the difference is between opinion and news and facts. You know, and literally teaching 7-year-olds that and continuing that on a year-by-year basis as part of their civics instruction all the way up through high school. We have nothing like that here in the United States. And frankly, I think if anybody tried to start something like that, you'd probably have, you know, these same politicians that our guest just a minute ago was talking about, who don't want people to wear masks or get vaccinated, would probably be trying to trash talk it. But what do you think?
Oh, I definitely believe in that there, because I always heard this here. You might have heard it as well, that they say do not ever trust anybody that say that you don't need something that they have. And I always hear that. And that's one of the things about it. Is like it is education, but if you ever study marketing tools and also propaganda has a lot of the similarities.
Oh, yeah.
They don't realize they're being persuaded. And that was kind of like drives me crazy because I studied basic marketing. And I don't know why people don't see exactly what I see, but I try not to fall into that mindset either. That a lot of people, they just fall into patterns and backgrounds.
Yeah, I'm with you, Delaney. This is one of the reasons why social media is so powerful. I used to own, in fact, I own 2 different ad agencies, and I used to teach advertising through the American Marketing Centers all over the country. And the most powerful form and the most persuasive form, therefore the most powerful form of advertising is called word of mouth. If you can get somebody that you trust or that a person trusts to pitch a product to them, they're far more likely to buy it. And this is why celebrity endorsements are a thing, because people feel like they know that celebrity, they believe that that celebrity has something to say. But social media is like the ultimate form of word-of-mouth advertising, essentially. If you know, and this is the whole influencer thing, and it's really, really big now on TikTok and Instagram, and you know, it's powerful, powerful stuff. And you're absolutely right. It propaganda and advertising and all this stuff. You know, Edward Bernays, the guy who founded the field of public relations back in the 19-teens, in large part on behalf of Woodrow Wilson to get us into World War I. Delane, thanks for the call. He was Sigmund Freud's nephew, and he was using psychology to come up with ways to influence the public to say, yes, we should get into World War I on behalf of Woodrow Wilson. You know, it's just an amazing history. In fact, the only media personality I've ever heard talk about that history was Glenn Beck, of all people. Anyhow, we'll be back. It's 22 minutes past the hour. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. So we've got a new video up over at ThomHartmann.com for supporters of our program about the 14th Amendment and the debt ceiling. And just kind of riddle me this one, Batman, right? The 14th Amendment reads, and I'm taking out the parts that specifically refer to pensions and bounties, for services suppressing the insurrection, because it came out of the Civil War. But the 14th Amendment reads, in part, the validity of the public debt of the United States shall not be questioned. In other words, Congress, you can't take actions that might cause the public debt not to be paid. You can't refuse to raise the debt ceiling, is how I read that. The debt ceiling, of course, didn't even exist when they wrote the 14th Amendment. That came along in 1917. But I think this is raising some really important questions, and I dig into it in this video over there. You can check it out. It's all over at ThomHartmann.com. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. This testimony before Congress this morning about Facebook, putting astronomical profits before people, by Frances Haugen, was just absolutely astonishing. And this is where it gets really interesting. Apropos of my last guest, Idaho has now one of the lowest COVID vaccination rates in the nation. 47% of Idaho adults are vaccinated, compared to like 78% of Vermont or 77% in Massachusetts. I think we're in the 70s here in Vermont, or in Oregon, excuse me. 47% in the state next to us in Idaho. So what do the Republicans do in Idaho in response to that? To the fact that so many people in Idaho are not vaccinated, are getting sick, are dying, are showing up in Oregon hospitals because Idaho is overwhelmed? What are they doing? Well, Idaho Senate Assistant Majority Leader, this is the number 2 Republican in the Idaho Senate, the second most powerful Republican senator in Idaho, has introduced a piece of legislation. His name is Steve Vick. He's introduced a piece of legislation that, according to a newspaper in Idaho, this is the Idaho Statesman, from a piece written by Hayat Noramin, Quote, the bill would penalize individuals, not agencies, for violation. Well, let me back up a little bit. It says it would charge government officials with a misdemeanor if they violate the state law on immunization, which allows residents to decline to get immunized without a threat of penalty by the federal government. In other words, if the federal government were to mandate vaccines, and by the way, the federal government has, for like any hospital that gets Medicare money, and if anybody in any state agency in the state of Idaho collaborates in any way to make that happen, they can face 6 months in prison, 6 months in jail, and a $5,000 fine or both for participating in vaccine mandates. I mean, this is like, people are dropping like flies in Idaho, and the Republican senator, the number 2 guy in the Republican state Senate says, let's pass a law making it illegal to have vaccine mandates in Idaho. What are these people thinking? I mean, is it really that, you know, the more people who die, the more chaos there is, the more people are going to blame the Democrats? I don't see how that works in Idaho. Idaho's going to vote for Republicans no matter what. Why kill off your own people? What am I missing here? We'll be back. It's 27 minutes past the hour. Stick around. Pick up your calls on the other side of the break.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
It's the place where we dare to ask, is Walmart a person? And we dare to say, no, not a chance. Give me a break. We'll be right back.
Guns for Hire, how the CIA and U.S. Army recruit mercenaries for white Rhodesia. It's a historical reprint of what appears to be a 1979 pamphlet, basically. This is from the introduction. It does have an ISBN number. It is available in book sources. In Zimbabwe, Rhodesia, actually this must have been published post-1980 because they're referencing Zimbabwe. In Zimbabwe, Rhodesia, 270,000 white settlers, mostly immigrated since World War II, controlled the government and economy, ruling over the 7 million black Africans. The Zimbabweans cannot vote. They have been forced off the bulk of the arable land, and they have no democratic rights whatsoever. All labor performance in Zimbabwe is black labor, and it is intensely exploited, often at less than subsistence wages. Zimbabweans have been fighting European invaders since the early 17th century. Since the 1890s, they have been directly ruled by Europeans, at first in the form of a private British corporation, the British South Africa Company. Since 1923, direct political rule has been in the hands of the white settlers, currently led by Ian Smith and his fascist Rhodesian Front Party. It's important to note that the white settlers were originally given this direct local power as a, quote, self-governing colony of the British government, thereby creating a master-caretaker relationship. During these past 80-odd years, Western imperialism, the multinational corporations of the United States, Britain, and South Africa, has extracted huge profits from the exploited and oppressed Zimbabwean population via the subsidiaries of the Anglo-Americans, Lonrho, AMAX, Union Carbide, Mobil, ITT, and other corporations. They fully intend to continue doing so as long as they can. The white settler minority has been rewarded for their violent subjugation of the Zimbabwean people with perhaps the highest national standard of living in the world. Sir Roy Walensky, the former Prime Minister of the Central African Federation, which included what is now Rhodesia, once said, "This man Smith has an appeal. It's the appeal of an easy life. For $6,000 a year, you can have 5 servants, a swimming pool, and a lot." Beginning during the early 1960s, however, the Zimbabwean nationalist forces under the leadership of the Zimbabwe African National Union, ZANU, evolved the strategy of guerrilla war to liberate their people and land. It is proving to be very successful. There are 20,000 guerrillas in base camps in Tanzania and Mozambique, over 3,000 in Zimbabwe itself, and this number is continually rising. In a meeting between Stephen Solars, a U.S. congressman, and the ZANU guerrilla leaders, they were reported to reject the possibility of enlisting the assistance of Cuban or other foreign troops, declaring that if we cannot liberate ourselves, we do not deserve to be liberated. Despite Western propaganda to the effect that the U.S. and British only wish to avoid a bloodshed in Rhodesia. Don't forget the Zimbabweans have been bleeding for almost a century. Their real fear is that the liberation struggle will win. With this victory in sight, it is not surprising that the counterattack by the Smith regime has become more vicious and brutal. Actually, this must have been published pre-1980, because this is when Smith was still in power in Rhodesia. More than 250,000 rural Zimbabweans have been forced into concentration camps. Terrorist raids have been conducted against Zimbabwean refugees in Mozambique. Dusk to dawn shoot-on-sight curfews have been instituted and enforced in the border areas. And escalating counterinsurgency attacks have been launched against the military arm of the liberation struggle, the Zimbabwean People's Army, ZIPA. It is crucial for Westerners to understand that the Smith regime has not stood alone in this barbaric campaign. This pamphlet documents the critically important element in U.S. imperialism's support for the Smith regime, white mercenary reinforcements for the fascist Rhodesian, quote, security forces. This flow of U.S. mercenaries to prop up white Rhodesia is an important, though secret, part of U.S. imperialism's strategy for Africa. The U.S. has massive investments in southern Africa. Zimbabwe alone supplies the bulk of high-grade chrome ore used in the U.S. for jet engines and other advanced technological items. Coal, copper, and other minerals are ripped out of Zimbabwe for U.S. industry. Mobil Oil, Texaco, Hertz Rent-A-Cars, Holiday Inns, and many other U.S. corporations operate illegally in Rhodesia through foreign subsidiaries. More important still is South Africa, the fortress of U.S. interests in Africa, where $1.5 billion is invested by GM, IBM, Ford, and other giant multinational corporations. The liberation of Zimbabwe would, for the first time, penetrate the buffer zone of satellite countries protecting the borders of South Africa. South African guerrilla fighters, who are already training by the thousands in camps in Tanzania and Zambia, would have direct access to re-enter their land and accelerate the liberation struggle. Knowing that the stakes are high, U.S. imperialism has worked to strengthen the white supremacist outposts in Africa, although at times this had to be done covertly. In 1970, the Nixon White House approved Henry Kissinger's Operation Tar Baby strategy, based on Option 2 of the Secret National Security Study Memorandum No. 39. This strategy essentially called for covert military assistance, including direct exchanges, so that South African troops could be trained in the U.S. in specialized tactics and weapons. This would be done while the U.S. tried to convince Africans that it was on their side. This is from the pamphlet number 39, that Kissinger memorandum. We would maintain public opposition to racial oppression, but relax political isolation and economic restrictions without openly taking a position undermining the United Kingdom and the UN on Rhodesia. We would be more flexible in our attitudes toward the Smith regime. And it goes on from there. Guns for hire. Our 1-hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3-hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. So we have a new video up over at thomhartmann.com. It's about 18 U.S. Code 2384, which is a law that was published back in put on the books on June 25th, 1948. It was updated in 1956. And it's very, very straightforward. It says, if two or more persons in any state or territory or in any place subject to the jurisdiction of the United States conspire to overthrow, put down, or destroy by force the government of the United States, or to levy war against them, or to oppose by force the authority thereof, or by force to prevent, hinder, or delay the execution of any law of the United States, or by force to seize, take, or possess any property of the United States, they shall be fined under this title or imprisoned for not more than 20 years or both. Tell me that doesn't perfectly describe what happened on January 6th. Seditious conspiracy. The video's at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. Welcome back. And let's pick up some of your phone calls here. Teresa in Asheville, North Carolina. Hey, Teresa, what's on your mind today?
Well, I'm really... I thought it was interesting that, the gal that from Facebook that testified, she was talking about how, it is dopamine, like cigarettes, one after another, but, there really is such a link to the addictive part of that. And my late husband was a recovering alcoholic, and of course, in the 12-step meetings, I learned so much about so many things. He went and I went to mine. But the 3 adjectives that they always give in those meetings about addiction is cunning, baffling, and powerful. We talked about the powerful part. Yeah, that's the 3 adjectives. You hear that all the time in meetings. Mm-hmm. And I don't know what can be done on it, but just for her, she said it quickly about the cigarettes, but I had a feeling years ago when Facebook started, and I'm an avid reader, and I could get into it, but I thought, you know what? I have a feeling this is just not going to be a little thing about families, and I'd have people say, you're not on Facebook? Nope, and I don't want to be.
Yeah.
And, but the addictive part of it, I really thought she couldn't delve into that because there were so many other important things she had to bring out.
Right.
But I don't know how that we could do a better job of realizing the addictive quality of all that stuff because, it really is. I mean, I've had a couple friends that thought, oh, God, all they do is talking about Facebook and showing me tons of pictures, and I think, I don't care. And they used to read. They don't read anymore much, not that books. And at least with a book, I can put it down and go do something. And I think, your mind has to, your brain has to work a little harder.
Yeah.
If you read some things that are challenging.
Yeah, and books are not as engaging and therefore not as addictive, not as sticky to us.
That's right.
Yeah,
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
But I'm glad she mentioned the cigarette thing. But boy, the addictive quality of that just mirrors all kinds of addictions. You hear it over and over in the 12-step meetings.
Yeah.
Now their focus is more on addiction.
Teresa, I've got to move along, but thank you for sharing your story with us, and it's a powerful one. I appreciate it. Thank you very much and thanks for listening to SiriusXM. Al in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Hey, Al, what's up?
Yeah, Tom, a follow-up on Denise's comments about Daystar. There's a televangelist named Marcus, I think his first name is Marcus Lamb. He and his wife are on this program. I think I saw him years ago. More recently, like in the last month, there's a new channel that's been offered on antenna TV. It's not a cable. It's an antenna broadcast. It's 38-1, I guess. Mm-hmm. And they are really, I think, they're discounting Dr. Fauci.
And this is a Christian evangelical channel, Al, is it not? And they're openly basically trash talking vaccines.
That's right. And then they advocate use of 3 medications: the horse medication,
ivermectin,
and and then
hydroxychloroquine.
And then there's a third one, and I can't remember what it is.
Yeah, I haven't heard it yet. But, Al, thanks for the information on that. Thanks for the heads up. I do appreciate it. Nancy in Elkhart, Indiana. Hey, Nancy, what's on your mind today?
Yes, hi. Remember when they had last week the weekend with the Women's March?
Yes.
And you mentioned that when they didn't have very much news coverage.
I had to go to BBC to get good coverage of it, actually, which is weird.
And as you mentioned, now the media has done the same thing as far as a dopamine rush to the brain. Well, I think that when the media does things like this, it's very much, that didn't give a very much of a high when you're watching the news, so it didn't cover it. And I think because, television is mostly now watched by us older folks, but these young kids, the media, knows that they better do something. They would do something on a channel that would bring in more money, the news, and that wouldn't. But those of us that are watching on the media, our brain doesn't need to be on a high. Where these young kids, this is where I think Facebook, this just like like you're saying, their brains can get high, and they can get high at a younger level.
Yeah,
and that's so much more dangerous than the people who are watching the news on television.
Yeah.
And that's where I think it's much more dangerous and things that we need to do about. The advertisers on television, well, that's too bad. We don't need to control them. We already do in a certain way.
Right.
But that's why Facebook, I think, needs to be much more watched and controlled than any other kind of advertising.
Yeah, I get it. I'm with you. Nancy, thank you very much for that. And let me just I'll continue with your phone calls in just a second, but I just want to share a story. I used to know a guy named Leonard Schlein. He was a brain surgeon and an author. He wrote a book about art and Zen, but the book that he wrote that I thought was most consequential, he's now passed away, ironically, of brain cancer. But the book that I thought was most consequential was his book, The Alphabet versus the Goddess. And what Schlein hypothesized, and there's a great hour-long video of his doing kind of a TED Talk. It's not a TED Talk presentation, but it's like that kind of thing that you can easily find on YouTube. Schlain is how you spell his last name, Leonard Schlein, Dr. Leonard Schlein. But basically what he said was that up until around, well, I forget the year, but it was in the 1500s, whenever Gutenberg's printing press started getting widespread use. Up until that point, most Europeans were completely illiterate. In fact, in many parts of Europe, it was illegal to be literate unless you were a member of the royalty or the church. And when the printing press happened, literacy just exploded across Europe. And his argument was that learning to read, learning an abstract alphabet when you are growing up and your brain is still developing is an entirely left brain function, right side function. It's the abstract part of the brain, what's sometimes described as the male brain or the linear. These are terrible metaphors and they don't completely work, but this is historically how it's been treated in pop psychology. That part of the brain became exaggerated, and the quote female part of the brain, or the right side of the brain, which controls the left side of the body, the part that processes music rather than words, that part got suppressed. And he documents in The Alphabet versus the Goddess how within a generation of widespread literacy in Europe, they went from having churches all over Europe that were dedicated to Mother Mary, that prior to literacy in Europe, Mary was the principal object of devotion, not Jesus. And that following widespread literacy in Europe in the mid-16th century, following this widespread literacy, the men started literally putting women to death, burning witches at the stake. And the Mary dedicated shrines were torn down, and the Mary dedicated churches were rededicated to male saints, and basically the men took over. And this was this massive rise of patriarchy, just as the result of people's brains being rewired by the experience of learning how to read as children and carrying that into their adult lives. That it actually rewired our brains. Now, if Schlein was right, and his hypothesis is still considered controversial, although a fellow by the name of Walter Ong, O-N-G, wrote a book called Oralcy and Literacy that is absolutely a brilliant, just makes Schlein's case for him, only in a very academic way. It's one of my favorite books. If he is right, that the way that just learning to read rewired our brains and therefore rewired our culture, it raises the question, what is social media doing to rewire the brains of the generation of people who grew up literally on social media, which would be basically, Gen X, Gen Y, Gen Z, and Gen Z. How different are their brains? How different is our society now as a result of this? And what does this inform us? I mean, what lessons can we take out of this about how we should react to that and adapt to that? Because literacy has, it's changed the face of the world. Anyhow, I'll pick up your phone. I'll continue your phone calls right after this break. It's 45 minutes past.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
We'll be right back with your calls in just a moment. It's the Thom Hartmann Program, where we ask, is Facebook a person? No, I don't think so. And welcome back. And John in Bend, Oregon. Hey, John, what's on your mind today?
Oh, yes, Tom. You were talking about teaching students about the media in Finland or Denmark.
Mm-hmm.
And I went to high school in the 70s, and we had a class called mass media, and that's exactly what the class was about.
Wow.
It taught us about advertising on TV and the radio. I mean, in the 70s, I think all we had was TV and radio and the newspaper. And it taught us about thinking critically when we saw an advertisement and different things like that.
That's great.
I thought that was interesting how you were talking about they're doing that now, and that's the class that I had when I was in high school in the 70s.
Yeah, well, the Reagan administration did away with that stuff. I'll bet that class is no longer being taught.
That's true. That's probably what happened, how it ended.
Yeah, it's pretty remarkable. John, thank you. Yeah. Thank you for the call. Gregory in Ventura, California. Hey, Gregory, what's up?
Hey, Tom, how are you?
I'm well.
It goes to the Facebook addiction.
Mm-hmm.
And I recall, and you do too, I would imagine you would, video games. Before social network, before, those horrible video games that taught the kids how to kill and build their own, kingdoms and whatnot, competition, whatever regulations they slapped, if they did, on the video game people, could they not use some of those same regulations maybe on Facebook? Because it's kind of the same addiction, but video games kind of started it all.
With the video games, I think to the extent that there was regulation, it had to do with obscene content and advertising, although I don't recall any specific laws that actually were put into place around video games. I know there's a lot of Sturm and Drang, a lot of rage and fury about them. And about obscenity and lyrics. You'll recall Tipper Gore getting on her high horse about labeling rock and roll if it had bad content. But I don't think I think that was always just entirely kind of voluntary.
Like parental guidance or something.
Yeah, and I ran about 20 forums on CompuServe back throughout the 1980s and the early 1990s, and we did not have an algorithm. We had a message board where you could post things, and we had moderators who could remove posts if they were wrong or obscene. We could ban people. You had to use your real identity. But it wasn't saying, okay, we're going to, in fact, we didn't even have the ability to do it as moderators to say, we're going to take this particular piece of content here that we think is just really inflammatory, and we're going to push it right out in front of everybody to try to start a food fight, on the idea that the food fight will cause people to hang out on CompuServe longer. And I think one of the reasons why CompuServe had no incentive to do that was that people paid a $7 a month subscription to be on CompuServe. And so, it wasn't an advertising-driven model. So if somebody stayed on CompuServe for 10 minutes a month, or if they stayed on there for 10 hours a month, it made no difference to CompuServe's revenue. And that might be a solution, is to say, okay, just this whole advertising-driven business model. But that's a tough one, because then you've got television and radio and all kinds of other media that are advertising-driven, including this program.
Yeah, I hear you. Yeah.
Gregory, I got to run, but thank you for the call. We'll be right back. It's 49 minutes past the hour. Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. The media is pushing this crazy narrative that with regard to masks and vaccines and COVID and all this kind of stuff, that America is divided. Like, you know, half of us want masks and half of us don't, or half of us want vaccines. It's just not true. 75% of Americans have received at least one dose of vaccine. 70% of Americans think that we should have mask mandates in all of our schools. Only 17%, this is from the latest Pew studies, polling, only 17% of Americans are opposed to mask mandates in schools. And what we have is this tiny fringe that is being cranked. Now we're learning from China as well as from Russia and perhaps other countries, plus the people in, a relatively small number of people, Trump followers, who think that tearing the country apart is a good thing and somehow it'll hurt Joe Biden and hurt the Democrats in the next election. It's crazy. I got a whole video rant about this over at thomhartmann.com that you can check out. And welcome back, Alan in Redwood City. Hey, Alan, what's up?
Well, I guess I'm following up something that you just talked about, and that is basically that I like you because you agree with me. But the anti-vaxxers, trying to convince them with facts is useless, because the anti-vaxxers have already made a commitment to Trump because they need somebody to believe in and a group to belong to. I mean, in Maslow's hierarchy, belonging is the key that holds everything together. Right. So if they make a commitment to Trump and all his crazy nonsense, anti-vax is just part of that. And people that on the radio and on TV that try and change an anti-vaxxer's mind with facts is just spitting into a piece of plexiglass.
Yeah, it is pretty remarkable that what you're describing, Alan, is basically tribalism, which is wired into our genes. And go ahead.
It's a tough problem, exactly.
Yeah.
And it's a complex problem, and somehow we have to change our approach to these folks. I feel sorry for them because they're the first people that want, Democrats that are wearing first responder outfits to take care of them when they get sick.
Yeah, which is funny. If you really don't believe in science, then why are you showing up at the hospital? I don't get it. But yeah, I'm with you. Yeah, Alan, thank you very much. It's nice to hear from you. Girish in San Jose. Am I saying your name right?
Yes, Tom. Thank you for taking my call.
Sure.
Girish.
What's up, Girish?
I wanted to continue that conversation about Facebook. I don't know if you're still talking about that or not. So I just wanted to sort of try to bring to our attention the larger picture. I mean, thank you so much for that perspective that you gave us about what happened when the books started coming out and people became literate. So that, I think, if you look at the trajectory throughout our history since then, every time something major has happened, it has changed society. I mean, even the Industrial Revolution, and of course, lately now it's technology. Mm-hmm. And the question of addiction, I think, goes much deeper than that, because we get addicted to so many things. It was smoking, the drunk, people who drink a lot, people who watch TV all the time. I mean, to some extent, my wife says that I'm addicted to free speech TV. So addiction is, so that is a common thing. I think the point that we are missing is there's something in our education that doesn't encourage discipline, that doesn't encourage critical thinking. And, I have two boys, 30 and 25, and touch wood, they've turned out fine. They don't have any major addictions. And that's because, my wife has been a disciplinarian, and she has taken active interest in their growing up. So that's all I want to say, is that we should not be looking for a scapegoat here. We should be looking at the broader picture. Education is a big problem here. And I'm not just talking about math and science.
Yeah, no, I get it, and I'm totally on board for literacy education like Finland is doing. I think we should do something like that here in the United States. And I would say also, regularly engaging with something that you find pleasurable and informative and useful, which is what I hope Free Speech TV is for you. I'm not sure that you could characterize that as an addiction. It would be a preference.
I agree with you.
And we use that word as a pejorative, and we should be using it as a medical term, essentially. And but there is substantial evidence that there is a actual addiction, a dopamine-based addiction associated with some types of social media that doesn't show up so much with other types. People are like constantly engaging. I would say probably Facebook and Twitter are the primary ones that are algorithm-driven, as opposed to the ones that, by and large, are not algorithm-driven, like the next door neighbor one, or the or LinkedIn, or some of these other sites that are just more, whoever posted the last thing there, that's what gets posted. Or like I said, the websites like Daily Kos or Democratic Underground, I don't think that they're running algorithms. They're just, they're more like, being upvoted by their readers. So it's kind of a different thing. So anyhow, I got to move along. Girish, thank you for the call. I appreciate it. Larry in Lompoc, California. Larry, a little less than a minute here before we hit the break. What's up?
It's Harry. Thank you.
Oh, Harry, I'm sorry.
Yes. I wanted to use an analogy, if I could, with regards to the media and social media, and that would be population inversion. It's a physics term with regards to how it is that a ruby laser works. The reason why I use that analogy is that we have echo chambers. And in population inversion, that's essentially what we're talking about, excited states where the protons then move out of that chamber. I think that when it comes to how some of these people come up with ideas on how to spread ideas through media and control our ideas, that they consider these analogies very specifically to the
I think it's a good one, Harry. And the coherence, of the beam is being defined by Facebook. We'll be back with Francis Moore Lappe.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More information at HelloFresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery for sleeping and pain relief. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Dinovite, only the best all-natural pet supplements. More info at dinovite.com. Annie's Kit Clubs, creativity delivered right to your door. More info at annieskitclubs.com/Tom. Wild Alaskan Company, delicious, sustainably sourced seafood delivered right to your door. More information at wildalaskancompany.com/Tom. And Mack Weldon, reinventing men's basics. More info at mackweldon.com/Tom.
Today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Francis Moore Lappe's Diet for a Small Planet, 50th Anniversary Edition, just reissued. And this is from the introduction to the 50th Anniversary Edition. It starts out with a quote from George Orwell: "To see what is in front of one's nose needs a constant struggle." I begin this journey with the realization that growing and eating plant-centered diets was a great choice. Today it's a no-contest necessity. Either we now make a big turn, or life on Earth as we know it is gone forever. Whoa, this blunt declaration rocks me. I'll admit it has taken me decades to get here, and I'm delighted now for this opportunity to share my learning journey with you, dear reader. You'll forgive me, though, if my First thoughts are of my own delight, as over the years, strangers have told me, your book changed my life. One story I'll surely never forget is from a friend and longtime head of the Berklee College of Music, Roger Brown. Quote, I was teaching in a small village in Kenya in 1979 when I came across a tattered version of your book, he told me. I read it on a mountain by moonlight, and it changed the course of my life. I'm still smiling. When anyone tells me of the book's effect on them, I always have to blurt out, yeah, me too. Diet for a Small Planet started as a one-page handout when I was 26, and it has profoundly shaped my life's quest. Now, in its 50th anniversary, I strive to capture key lessons that help me to this day, and that I hope will help you in these challenging times. Challenging doesn't quite do it. Over the past few years, we have been battling the fiercest storm of my lifetime. Years of attacks on the integrity of our democracy, leading to the first ever citizens' assault on the Capitol, a pandemic deemed the worst in a century, and murders by police that have fueled the Black Lives Matter movement, furthering, we can hope, our nation's long-delayed reckoning with systemic racism. At the same time, our climate crisis nears a tipping point that will drastically hasten destruction. And what first shocked me into action, hunger amid plenty, has gotten worse in recent years, even though the world's food supply offers 1/5 more calories for each of us than it did 50 years ago. Here at home, hunger is also rising. But in a mighty storm, sometimes the biggest tree comes crashing down, and for the first time, we can see its roots. Now is such a storm. So how do we grasp the roots and use what we discover to pull ourselves back from catastrophe and guide us toward life itself? Excuse me. The great news here is that millions in the United States and many more around the world are grasping the root causes of our intertwined crises and remaking their lives in ways aligned with what humans and natures need to thrive. 50 years ago, my youthful aha was that food has special power, as every day our very personal food choices connect us to each other and to all of nature. Shock in discovering the needlessness of hunger triggered in me new ways of seeing what's profoundly amiss in our world and even our power to fix it. Back then, I had no idea how urgent my message would soon become. Driven by tightening corporate power over our democracy, harms from meat-centered agriculture and diets have continued to mount, damaging human health, the natural world, and the climate. And now the ultimate harm. We have destroyed so many species, largely in feeding ourselves, that we face the 6th great extinction of life on Earth. To avoid planetary disaster, warns natural historian David Attenborough, we must allow the reflourishing of life by greatly reducing the land area we farm. And, quote, quickly and the most effective way is to change our diet, end quote. Moving beyond the vast inefficiency of meat-centered eating and choosing plant-centered diets, he projects, would cut in half the land use and still produce plenty of food for all. Now, with vastly more at stake than when my own eyes first opened, it's critical to grasp how we got here. So let's go for those roots. Over the 50 years since I sat in the UC Berkeley Library pondering the root causes of hunger, I've tried to keep digging into the question beneath the question to help me grasp why we humans have messed up so badly. And here's the deepest question my digging has turned up so far. Why are we together creating a world that as individuals none of us would choose? After all, I've never met anyone who gets up in the morning vowing to make another child starve or to turn up the planet's temperature. In the 20th anniversary edition of this book, I introduced the power of ideas to explain what seems inexplicable. I invite you to read my introduction to that edition directly following this one. Today, I express the root challenge this way. While seeing is believing is a common expression, for our species, the reverse is often true. Believing is seeing, or as Albert Einstein put it more directly, it is theory which decides what we can observe. In other words, our internalized filters can blind us to solutions right in front of our noses, requiring precisely the constant struggle George Orwell calls to us in that opening quote. One filter above all blocks us from solutions, a belief that life is still made out of parts, when in truth all life is connected. I can see in my mind's eye the twinkly grin of the late German physicist Hans-Peter Dürr, who a decade ago laid it out to me simply. Frankie, in life there are no parts, only participants. Got it, Hans-Peter. and I've never forgotten, and it is the core truth of our being. The book is the 50th anniversary edition of Diet for a Small Planet by Frances Moore Lappe.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
You know, welcome back to the third hour of our program. You know, there's not a lot of books that have consequentially altered the course of literally millions of people's lives, and arguably even the course of a nation's trajectory. You think of Ralph Nader, Unsafe at Any Speed, or Rachel Carlson's Silent Spring. Frances Moore Lappe's book, Diet for a Small Planet, is one of those books. It's one of those books that has had an enormous impact on the United States and frankly, all around the world on a whole bunch of different levels. And so I'm super pleased to have Frances Moore Lappe with us for the next hour as our Conversations with Great Minds proceeds, for our Conversations, the Great Minds Conversation. Frankie, welcome to the program. It's great to have you back on. It's been a while.
Very much. You are my hero. I hope you know that.
Back at you.
Yeah. Yes. So it's a thrill, a real thrill, and I just am so touched that you read that first section of the opening of the 50th anniversary. Oh, I'm so touched that you did that, because it really does express why I'm here again 50 years later.
Well, thank you. That was on our non-commercial stations when our commercial stations are in a break at the top and bottom of the hour. We insert book reports here, and that was our book report. It was a short reading from Diet for a Small Planet. Frankie, I'd like to, since we have a little bit of elbow room here, we've got an hour to talk, I'd like to kind of break this into pieces and start out with just the my diet stuff. What impact does diet have on human health? What have we learned? What had you learned at that point in the late 60s, early 70s, as you were putting this book together and bringing it to print, that caused you to alter your eating habits with regard to? I mean, we'll get into the small planet part of it, but just the human diet health part of it. What did you know then, and what have you learned since?
Well, then I knew very little about the health part of it. I had grown up in Fort Worth, Texas, also known as Cowtown. So we ate hamburgers and roast beef, etc. So I did not know really much about the nutrition of it, meaning eating meat, not eating meat. What so alarmed me, what so shocked me, is the tremendous amount of waste of agricultural and our Earth's resources to produce that meat. We get so little back from the grain-fed standard that we had moved to, that I was just shocked that the experts were telling us that we were at the Earth's limits, when in fact we were actually shrinking the capacity of the Earth to feed us by feeding so much to livestock. Just to put a number on that, Tom, now about 80% of our agricultural land, including grazing, is devoted to livestock production that supply us with 18% of our calories. So that's some measure of how much is lost along the way. So actually at the time, the only evidence we had then in 1970, 71 was Seventh-day Adventists. Have you ever heard about that?
Oh, yeah, I knew some of them, and yeah, go ahead. Tell the story.
They were vegetarian,
yeah.
And they, because there weren't, the evidence was that, hey, they don't eat meat, they don't, they're vegetarian, and they're doing a lot better on longevity in particular, and that was the only little piece of evidence we had then. But I really, in the first edition, wasn't so occupied with the health piece as I was the waste piece. I wasn't. It was before, of course, we knew the climate impact of a meat-centered diet and overall health and species decimation. As you read in the opening, I quote David Attenborough about how the grain-fed meat-centered diet is implicated in this massive species extinction in which all life depends on all these critters. A lot of that is from pesticides, which have become so much more toxic and so are threatening many, many insect species. So that's my short answer to that.
Well, I recall in the 60s. I think I became a vegetarian in 67 or 68. And of course, vegetarian meant you were still eating dairy and still eating eggs, but those are pretty much the only animal products. And friends and parents and whatnot were saying, "Oh my God, you're going to die of a protein deficiency." And your book was actually one of the things that convinced me. I mean, it was half a decade later, but that I wasn't going to die of a protein deficiency because I was just. I mean, it was a kind of a combination of the anti-war movement, which many of us in the anti-war movement were becoming vegetarians as a statement of nonviolence. And then also I had taken transcendental meditation training, the Maharishi and all this, which is Hinduism, which is vegetarian. And so it just seemed like the thing to do. But you laid out in your book, combining different amino acids to come up with complete proteins. We now know that probably that concern was exaggerated, but the whole essential amino acids thing, and it was a remarkable revelation for me that that if you mixed beans and rice together, you got everything you needed, right? It was just as good as beef.
Yeah, I
riff
love
on that for a minute.
Yeah, I love that so many traditional diets throughout the world of indigenous peoples have combined grains and legumes, the peas, beans, and lentils. And I thought that was just so cool that our bodies told us what to do. And you're right that back then, I often, Tom, people would say to me, "Oh, you made peace in my family. That was your biggest impact because my parents thought I would die."
Yeah.
So
that's what my parents were thinking. Yeah, literally.
Yeah. So we've just grown now, and as I say in the new 50th anniversary edition, I've said, relax. Yes, there's maybe something to this complementary protein stuff, but we don't need to even think about it because if we eat healthfully, if we eat whole foods and for a range of foods, we get enough protein. Because Americans eat now, Tom, twice the proteins our bodies can use. And we do not store protein. We just use it as energy if we have more than we can use as protein. So it's really so much easier than we thought that we just can relax about it and just look for what's healthy and good. And just another thought I had riffing off on that was that, people said to me, "Oh, you're giving up so much and how is this sacrifice?" And I said, no. I just discovered that actually there are only a few kinds of meat. But if you turn to the plant world, you see all the variety of colors and taste and textures and traditions that you can choose from in terms of, Latin or Indian or Indonesian cuisine to get inspired. So it was always a journey of discovery, not a journey of deprivation or cutting back.
Well, and in fact, most cultures around the world historically, and this is also true of indigenous and aboriginal cultures, used meat not as a primary ingredient, but more as a condiment isn't the right word, but kind of a supplement to a principally vegetable diet, simply because of the availability of it, if for no other reason. I mean, there are some exceptions to that. People who lived in the Arctic, who are living on seals and fish, but by and large, that's the case, is it not? Most societies around the world are not meat-based in their eating to begin with.
Right, exactly. That, yes, in traditional societies, we evolved in these tight-knit tribal communities that we did eat meat when the hunter would go out and get some, and then we would share it. That's one of the things that I learned in anthropology, that it wasn't just the hunter's family, but everybody got to eat some of that. So it was a complement to the plant-based And a lot of the plant-based was from women out there gathering.
Yeah, the hunter-gatherer societies. There you go.
Right.
We're talking with Frances Moore Lappe, the activist and author of over 20 books, including Diet for a Small Planet, that just came out, new and updated, 50th anniversary edition. She is a visiting scholar at UC Berkeley, MIT, and Suffolk University in Boston, just to name a few. Smallplanet.org is the website. On Twitter, FMLAPPE.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We'll be back in just a moment with Frances Moore Lappe and the new 50th anniversary edition of Diet for a Small Planet. Seminal work. Frankie, I'm curious, if you don't mind, and feel free to say no, that's personal. But I'm curious about how your personal evolution of what you eat, how you eat, has happened over all these years.
Sure. Yeah. I was pretty much mainstream, growing up, as I say, in Cowtown, and I did make this radical shift to the plant-based. I'm not a vegan. I do eat, I have cream in my coffee, and I do eat some cheese. So it's pretty much happened when I woke up in the learning about how wasteful our grain-fed, meat-centered diet is. And I don't think it's changed radically since then because at all. I also wanted to point out that I had been this classic American female, I think common American, experience for females being obsessed about their weight and counting calories. I was one of those. And when I shifted to the plant-centered eating, I just got to the weight that seemed right for my body, and it hasn't changed in all those years. So that's pretty much who I am now, is where I was at the end of 1971 and going forward.
And it served you well, obviously. I think this is such an extraordinary issue. And how do we best do outreach to Americans who have been trained on the food pyramid, and the meat industry basically has been a large part of our lives? Telling us, and frankly, I don't know what they're doing now in school, but when I was a kid in school in the 50s and 60s, it was you must have meat. It was part of the food pyramid. How do we react to that, and how has America changed in that regard with regard to education?
Well, I'm not sure about the education piece of it, but I do know that there is a much greater emphasis now on the value of whole plant foods, and we see this in the more community gardens there are, and the thousands of community-supported farms where you can, as we do here, we get a share that we have. So we have fresh produce all summer, and that in farmers markets. Wow, that's really taken off. So I think there's more awareness, and certainly I've seen the reports from the food industry saying that this kind of Whole Foods shopping is a greater share of increased sales in the food world. So. And of course, you go into any restaurant now, and there is almost always a plant option, and that did not exist at all when I began. In fact, in my office here, within a few blocks, just in the last 4 years or so, I think 4 plant-centered options in restaurants for lunch have opened up. And so I just feel it here in the Boston area very strongly, this shift.
Yeah, and it's happening all over. Same thing here in Oregon. In Portland, we've got a bunch of vegan or nearly vegan restaurants, and even a food truck. So it's like pretty good stuff. Yeah, seriously. It's great food, too. We'll be right back with Frances Moore Lappe. Her new book, or her book, Diet for a Small Planet, is out in a brand new edition, updated for 2021. Diet for a Small Planet. We'll be right back. Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. So for this week's special video, for the supporters of our program that we put up over at thomhartmann.com, I stepped into the Wayback Machine, and it's really remarkable when you go back over what President Obama accomplished and the Democrats in the House of Representatives and in the Senate, what they accomplished between 2008 and 2010 when they controlled Congress and the White House versus everything that the Republicans blocked. I mean, the Democrats in those 2 years, they saved Chrysler, they saved General Motors, they turned 800,000 monthly job losses into job gains. They increased spending and education spending, decreased the cost of student loans, all kinds of great stuff. But then when the Republicans took over, they blocked a veterans job bill, they blocked Wall Street reform, they blocked immigration reform, they blocked political ad disclosure. And this is just a little tip of the iceberg. You can see the whole video over at thomhartmann.com. Back, we're talking with Frances Moore Lappe. She is the author of Diet for a Small Planet, along with 19 other books, or more than 20 other books, I guess. And it's now out in this new 20th century edition, or 21st century edition, and just remarkable. Protein Factory in Reverse. Tell me about this, Frances.
Well, here's one fact from that Protein Factory in Reverse, is that when we eat grain-fed meat, beef that is, we only get, of the calories that cow has eaten, we get 3% of the calories back in the beef that we eat. So that's what I meant. It's a big shrinking machine that we have created, and it's one that is implicated in a lot of our poor health. I just learned that the World Health Organization has now deemed processed meat, from hot dogs and salami, etc., processed meat as a carcinogen, and red meat as a possible carcinogen.
Wow. And so basically what we're doing by converting cropland, we take cropland, we grow crops, soybeans and whatnot. On that, we feed it to animals, and then we eat the animals, and we're receiving only 3% of essentially all the nutrients that were taken from the sun and the air and the water and the minerals and whatnot in the soil. We're only getting about 3% of that.
In the calories that we eat. It is the calorie to calorie from the feed, just the feed that is fed, the calories of the feed. Yeah, that's it. So
is there a political, is there a movement within the agricultural community now to try to move away from what do you call them? The crops that are grown to feed to animals, feed crops, toward fruits and vegetables, human food crops?
Yes, and yes, there has been, and I think for a long time, just the difficulty. This is not going to surprise you, but our food system, the monopoly or oligopoly power of all aspects, up the chain of our food system in terms of, like meat packing or whatever the piece of the puzzle is very centrally controlled, and takes seeds. When I began way back when, there were 50 seed companies competing to bring seeds of a variety of kinds to farmers, and now they're just about 4. It's just a handful that are so dominant. So I think it's much harder to imagine, because so many farmers are stuck, dependent upon, just from year to year, dependent upon the structure of where they get their inputs, the fertilizers and the pesticides, and then how they sell it to the processors who turn it into a feed or whatever. So it is hard to break out of that highly concentrated system. But some people are doing it. I tell a story in the book about one of my favorite learnings has been the fact that trees and crops do not compete with each other. And around the world, throughout history, people have discovered that mixing trees and crops in the same fields actually benefits it all in greater overall output. And so I highlight the Savannah Institute in Wisconsin that has taken the lead in this, and there are many others doing this as well that are breaking free from the dominant, wasteful, and so harmful practices. And just, ecological organic farming, it is expanding much faster than other types of farming, but it still is a small percentage in the United States. But even, what did I say in that chapter, that there are a handful of southern states that within 5 years doubled their organic acreage. So that is a sign that is significant, that people are looking to free themselves from the harms of pesticides. On that note, too, Tom, another thing that we can be grateful for Biden is that they finally banned now this, if I can say it right, the chloriferous, how do you say it? Yeah. It's, I was practicing the pronunciation, but it is an insecticide that does nerve damage, especially children who are exposed to it, and that has now been banned.
Right. It had. My recollection is it had been banned by Obama, but the ban hadn't come into effect, and so Trump did away with it. Am I remembering that right?
Exactly. That's it. That's it.
And so Biden put the ban back into place. It's great. We're talking with Frances Moore Lappe. It's our Conversations with Great Minds. We'll be back with her new book, or her book, Diet for a Small Planet, out in a new edition just now.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
And our website is smallplanet.org. You can tweet her at FMLAPPE. We'll be right back. Book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Frances Moore Lappe's Diet for a Small Planet, 50th Anniversary Edition, just reissued. And this is from the introduction to the 50th Anniversary Edition. It starts out with a quote from George Orwell: "To see what is in front of one's nose needs a constant struggle." I begin this journey with the realization that growing and eating plant-centered diets was a great choice. Today it's a no-contest necessity. Either we now make a big turn, or life on Earth as we know it is gone forever. Whoa, this blunt declaration rocks me. I'll admit it has taken me decades to get here, and I'm delighted now for this opportunity to share my learning journey with you, dear reader. You'll forgive me, though, if my first thoughts are of my own delight, as over the years, strangers have told me, "Your book changed my life." One story I'll surely never forget is from a friend and longtime head of the Berklee College of Music, Roger Brown. Quote, "I was teaching in a small village in Kenya in 1979 when I came across a tattered version of your book," he told me. "I read it on a mountain by moonlight, and it changed the course of my life." I'm still smiling. When anyone tells me of the book's effect on them, I always have to blurt out, "Yeah, me too." Diet for a Small Planet started as a one-page handout when I was 26, and it has profoundly shaped my life's quest. Now, in its 50th anniversary, I strive to capture key lessons that help me to this day, and that I hope will help you in these challenging times. Challenging doesn't quite do it. Over the past few years, we have been battling the fiercest storm of my lifetime. Years of attacks on the integrity of our democracy, leading to the first ever citizens' assault on the Capitol, a pandemic deemed the worst in a century, and murders by police that have fueled the Black Lives Matter movement, furthering, we can hope, our nation's long-delayed reckoning with systemic racism. At the same time, our climate crisis nears a tipping point that will drastically hasten destruction. And what first shocked me into action, hunger amid plenty, has gotten worse in recent years, even though the world's food supply offers 1/5 more calories for each of us than it did 50 years ago. Here at home, hunger is also rising. But in a mighty storm, sometimes the biggest tree comes crashing down, and for the first time, we can see its roots. Now is such a storm. So how do we grasp the roots and use what we discover to pull ourselves back from catastrophe and guide us toward life itself? Excuse me. The great news here is that millions in the United States and many more around the world are grasping the root causes of our intertwined crises and remaking their lives in ways aligned with what humans and natures need to thrive. 50 years ago, my youthful aha was that food has special power, as every day our very personal food choices connect us to each other and to all of nature. Shock in discovering the needlessness of hunger triggered in me new ways of seeing what's profoundly amiss in our world and even our power to fix it. Back then, I had no idea how urgent my message would soon become. Driven by tightening corporate power over our democracy, harms from meat-centered agriculture and diets have continued to mount, damaging human health, the natural world, and the climate. And now the ultimate harm. We have destroyed so many species, largely in feeding ourselves, that we face the sixth great extinction of life on Earth. To avoid planetary disaster, warns natural historian David Attenborough, we must allow the reflourishing of life by greatly reducing the land area we farm. And, quote, quickly and the most effective way is to change our diet, end quote. Moving beyond the vast inefficiency of meat-centered eating and choosing plant-centered diets, he projects, would cut in half the land use and still produce plenty of food for all. Now, with vastly more at stake than when my own eyes first opened, it's critical to grasp how we got here. So let's go for those roots. Over the 50 years since I sat in the UC Berkeley Library pondering the root causes of hunger, I've tried to keep digging into the question beneath the question to help me grasp why we humans have messed up so badly. And here's the deepest question my digging has turned up so far. Why are we together creating a world that as individuals none of us would choose? After all, I've never met anyone who gets up in the morning vowing to make another child starve or to turn up the planet's temperature. In the 20th anniversary edition of this book, I introduced the power of ideas to explain what seems inexplicable. I invite you to read my introduction to that edition directly following this one. Today, I express the root challenge this way. While seeing is believing is a common expression, for our species, the reverse is often true. Believing is seeing, or as Albert Einstein put it more directly, it is theory which decides what we can observe. In other words, our internalized filters can blind us to solutions right in front of our noses, requiring precisely the constant struggle George Orwell calls to us in that opening quote. One filter above all blocks us from solutions, a belief that life is still made out of parts, when in truth all life is connected. I can see in my mind's eye the twinkly grin of the late German physicist Hans-Peter Dürr, who a decade ago laid it out to me simply. Frankie, in life there are no parts, only participants. Got it, Hans-Peter, and I've never forgotten, and it is the core truth of our being. The book is the 50th anniversary edition of Diet for a Small Planet by Frances Moore Lappe. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. Welcome back to our Conversations with Great Minds Hour with Frances Moore Lappe, the activist, author of, or co-author of over 20 books, including Diet for a Small Planet, which is now out in its 50th anniversary, newly updated edition. She's a visiting scholar at UC Berkeley, MIT, and Suffolk University in Boston, just to name a few, and is the recipient of 19 honorary degrees. Smallplanet.org is the website, Twitter handle FMLappe, L-A-P-P-E. Frankie, let's talk about health and the environment. How do these things tie together?
Well, as we have moved to this very wasteful grain-fed meat-centered diet, highly concentrated control, we have also seen a huge growth of disease, in the sense that in the last 50 years, approximately 5-fold increase in the U.S. in diabetes. And part of that is moving to a highly processed diet. Now it's called ultra-processed. So it's both the meat-centered and the ultra-processed foods that have added salt, added sugar. And so that is a dramatic change. And it's estimated now that about a third of Americans are either diabetic or pre-diabetic, meaning that they're on the pathway. So I think then we also know that something like let me just say here that we understand that eating a grain-fed, meat-centered diet also contributes to heart disease and certain cancers, and so it's really it's really not healthy.
Yeah,
put it bluntly.
And it's not healthy for the environment either.
Right, because what has been happening is really, as you opened up with this threat of the sixth great extinction, that this uniform growing of these crops over such wide areas and destroying rainforests to do it. I want to return to that in a sec. But it brings about the decimation of so many insect species in particular that there is a great fear of that over the next few decades that we could really see this loss of insects that are essential to growing food. And in the rainforest, something like 80% of the rainforest destruction, say in the Amazon, has been to make room for cattle grazing and for feed crops. And the Amazon is the richest center of biodiversity in the world. So that is a huge loss. And if we, on the other hand, that really contributes a lot to the environmental crisis. I want to move there right now. That as we destroy forests, then that is part of our destruction of what is absorbing carbon. And it was estimated that if we move to a plant-centered diet, this peer-reviewed study found that we could be the equivalent in terms of benefit to the climate challenge, equivalent to taking basically all the cars and trucks and trains and ships off the road and off the seas. I mean, that is really significant. So it is when we're choosing a plant-centered diet, we know that we are reducing our human impact on creating climate change.
So how would America, you note in the book that over the last 50 years, our meat exports have more than doubled. And, so we're obviously, growing more and more beef in particular, but also pork and chicken and other meats. How would America be different if the whole country were to adopt not necessarily even a vegan or a vegetarian diet, but just, cut their meat consumption back to what is pretty much the norm for the world, which is maybe one day a week eating essentially a meat-based meal or the equivalent thereof, or eating a small enough amount of meat that it just makes up that small amount of the diet that is typically, is what you typically find in other, not necessarily other so-called westernized or advanced or developed or wealthy societies, but what you find in societies that are living the way that they've been living sustainably for thousands of years. How would America be different if we were to shift away from a meat-based diet as a country?
Yeah, well, one of the first things, as I said, is that we now are one of the worst, and per capita we are way up there as one of the very worst climate culprits. I like to think of it as, so we are continue to emit greenhouse gases at a very high rate, especially per capita, compared to the rest of the world. So that would really go down big time, as I was talking about how shifting to shifting to a plant-centered diet would overall be the equivalent of taking all of these vehicles off the road if we did that globally. So I think that we would definitely remove ourselves from being one of the very worst climate culprits. And we would also, to do that, would involve such so much diversity of the use of our land, because we're using so much now. Our two major crops that take up, a huge portion of our agricultural land are corn and soy in these huge monocrops, and those are what are destroying. I believe it's estimated that 40% of our insects could be extinct within the next few decades because of this kind of monoculture, single crops over these huge acres, using pesticides. And so we would be protecting the diversity of insect and other forms of life that we need to grow food into the future. So that would be a really, really good thing. And we would certainly see these healthcare costs and troubles and pain and misery go down related to, for example, this very extreme level of diabetes that we have now, where, as I say, a third of Americans are either diabetic or pre-diabetic. So we think of all that money we'd save on healthcare alone, as well as just the vitality that we'd have. And so it would be also require, to get there, would require democratization of our government, so that corporate lobbyists, and now which there are 20 lobbyists in Washington for every person that we have elected to represent us there. And I want to point out, agribusiness lobbyists are a bigger part of that than even the oil and gas industry. So another thing that would have to be part of this transition is we step up as citizens and say, hey, we don't want industry determining this dangerous agricultural system that's bad for our health and bad for the earth. We want our real voice of Americans, of what is best for all of us. So I think that means really stepping up to get money out of the controlling place it has in our government.
Yeah, there's a kind of a cycle of the lobbyists to the politicians to the subsidies for the agricultural industry, and on with that. And in fact, you talk about democracy. You've written a couple of books about democracy in the United States, and this, but I don't think most people make the connection between how we eat and how we govern ourselves. Beyond the obvious, there's lobbyists who want to funnel money to the people who are growing our food. Can you speak to that? What do you mean the democracy is the problem?
Well, you named it too. I just checked my facts here that half of retiring senators end up as lobbyists and often revolve around, between those roles. So there is this very clear problem we have of people who we think are representing us when they actually have ties to the problem and that are being rewarded for voting for policies that are not in the interest of their constituents. So that is just very simple. By the way, I just looked at how much Germany spends per capita, because that's the only fair way to do it on a national election compared to us. And it came out like 400 and something times greater here than there. If you look at the $14.4 billion spent on our last election, and that was doubled. It doubled in one election cycle. So I think that's a really clear call. And the food connection for me from the very beginning has been that what's more personal? Hardly anything more personal than what we put into our mouths every day. And if we align those choices with what we know is best for us, best for the earth, best for others, we feel more powerful. We don't feel like a victim so much. And that changes our energy, I believe, Tom, that making those choices that align with the world we want. And that enables us to think, well, what else could I do, right? And to go deeper and to remind. It's like, for me, I used to say, wearing a string around my finger every day. I'm choosing these foods that aren't just responding to advertising, right? And it makes me remember all my connections to you, to all of us, to, our government and what the policies they're making, and to the earth. So I just think it's a great way to start. And it's not a distraction, in my view. It's a key.
Yeah, remarkable. We're talking with Frances Moore Lappe, the author of Diet for a Small Planet, just out now in new and improved, or new and updated 50th anniversary edition. One of the truly remarkable books of our time, one of the truly remarkable authors of our time. Smallplanet.org is the website. FM Lappe is the Twitter handle. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
We'll be back with Frances Moore Lappe in just a moment. So, Frankie, tell me about movements. We saw the kind of consumer movement that came out of Ralph Nader's work, and the environmental movement that came out of Rachel Carlson's book. And I would argue that a vegetarian movement came out of your book. Do you see it that way? And to what extent, the old, I remember there used to be a North American Vegetarian Society that was a big deal back in the 60s and 70s. I don't even know if they're still around. They may well be, but it's at some point, it's sort of like, the anti-Vietnam War movement. Well, at some point, it just became all of us, and then the war ended. How separate is the movement part of this from the just, okay, this is the normal part of life part of it?
Gosh, I don't know the answer to that because I'm so living it, and I guess here in the greater Boston area, probably it's not a sample of the country. So I really don't know how I answer that, but I do realize, as you say, there's just this burst of appreciation for that it's possible to be healthy. In fact, you might be healthier, with the plant-centered diet. And just the term plant-centered, I think, is really helpful rather than saying vegetarian. Right. Plant-centered, I call it plant and planet-centered now, because we really have to understand that this is not just about our personal health, it's about the health of all. And we can't get there from here if we, in terms of the climate crisis, for example, we can't get there, and, overall health. But so I do feel that it is beyond where like you say, a vegetarian movement, and it's more shifting into overall consciousness that plant-centered, planet-centered is good on all these many levels, and it makes just so much sense from the pocketbook sense, or however you want to call it. So I guess my social movement eagerness is to link it to the democracy movement. That really we're at a stage where a movement of movements is the way we need to think about the democracy movement, because whether it's for the environment or whether it's any really key reform, racial justice, you name it. If we don't have democracy, we're not going to get there. And so I think this movement of movements, that we can be part of Black Lives Matter, we can be part of the environmental movement of coming out for, demonstrations by the Extinction Rebellion and wonderful people in that movement, and also embrace the democracy movement as that which underlies. And so we've created a website, democracymovement.us, which I like a lot because it's us and it's also United States. So there is an intro for wherever you are in the country. We have a map. You can go to your state and see what's happening, because right now, as you, I'm sure, have talked about, Tom, there's a big effort to restrict our democratic rights by the Republican Party. So
yeah,
we've got to step up.
There you go. Francis Moore Lappe, we will be back in just a moment. I've got to take 60 seconds here and read a commercial on the commercial side of the show. We will be back with Francis in just a moment. Stick around. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. So there are actually some substantial differences between the Taliban, the Afghanistan Taliban, the group that has, that Donald Trump signed what his Secretary of State his Defense Secretary and his National Security Advisor referred to as surrender documents to back in early 2020. There's a difference between the Taliban and ISIS, or even K-ISIS, which is how they're identifying the ISIS group that has emerged in Afghanistan. The main difference is that the Taliban's ambitions are largely confined to Afghanistan. They want to be a regional force. They were the government of Afghanistan before. They want to be the government of Afghanistan again. ISIS, on the other hand, wants to reestablish the entire caliphate across the Middle East, across Northern Africa, across parts of Southern Europe. And this is going to bring these two into conflict. I've got a whole video about this over at ThomHartmann.com for folks who support the program. Check it out. And welcome back. We're talking with Francis Moore Lappe about her the new 50th anniversary edition of Diet for a Small Planet. Which is just an absolutely remarkable book. Frankie, you were talking about democracymovement.us, and I'm looking at this page here, worried about democracy. The democracy movement is here. Together, let's make history. How does this tie into the themes of Diet for a Small Planet? You play a role in this website.
Yeah, well, I did say 50 years ago, more or less, that hunger is not caused by a scarcity of food, but a scarcity of democracy, because nobody chooses to go hungry. And so if you're not eating enough to be healthy, then you are deprived of power. If you have no voice, then you're not living in a democracy. And that is got to be understood, that nobody chooses this most primal deprivation. And we in America have to grasp that we think of ourselves as a democracy leader in the world, but we are not. I follow the rankings, where we are. There's a project at Harvard that teams up with the University of Sydney that ranks us. The Electoral Integrity Project puts us behind about 55 countries, including South Africa, Poland, Peru. Then there's another center in Sweden that ranks us behind about 30 countries, and they note that there's been a backsliding, and we're right in there, named as one of the countries with the most gone backward. So I don't want to depress people. Always want to motivate us, but I think we can't move forward if we have an illusion about who we are as Americans. And so it's really important that we share this bad news as well as the good news, that there are people working for democracy reforms, and we have on our website a lot of examples of where ordinary people have stepped up and done amazing things at the state and city level. So how best do we get there? I mean, it seems to me like the core cancer in our democratic systems, and I realize we're kind of drifting away from diet here a bit, but I get the interconnection. But it seems that the core cancer is money, and that the Supreme Court has legalized billionaires and big corporations owning politicians. And we have a few politicians, even in the Democratic Party, who are, outright owned and proud of it. But the entire Republican Party seems to have embraced this. What steps do you see to resolve that issue? Well, I agree with those who who assert that we must reverse in effect the impact of Citizens United that opened the floodgates. But believe me, we had money in politics before then. I think that was 2010 was the United Citizens United. So, but I just want to underscore that there are, particularly at state and city levels. For example, we tell the story of a young woman in Michigan, Katie Fahey, who just got truly upset about the degree of gerrymandering in her state. And just this one young woman started a campaign and then turned into traveling all across the state with all sorts of people. And there's a beautiful documentary about her. And in the end, they got a resolution. They got the system changed so that there could be fair districting in Michigan. And so we tell the stories on our website, democracymovement.us, of people like Katie and others who are working for, voting rights. The three arenas are the voting rights protection and the end of gerrymandering and then money out of politics. And even, but with, for example, public financing, which was part of what I think of as a Sarbanes bill, what became H.R. 1 and then S1, with a whole raft of reforms. One of them was to enable public financing of elections, which we had. Jimmy Carter won with public financing. Mm-hmm. So that's not forbidden by the Citizens United disastrous ruling.
Largely wiped out, unfortunately. But yeah, I'm with you. I'm completely with you. Frankie, we're out of time, but thank you so much for being with us today, and thank you so much for writing this absolutely transformational book, Diet for a Small Planet. Frances Moore.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for all you do. Thank you.
Back at you. It has been a real honor. And thank you for being with us today. We will be back tomorrow, same time, same place. In the meantime, don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. Get out there, get active, tag you're in, and check out your diet. See you tomorrow.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More information at hellofresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery for sleeping and pain relief. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Dinovite, only the best all-natural pet supplements. More info at dinovite.com. Annie's Kit Clubs, creativity delivered right to your door. More info at annieskitclubs.com/Tom. Wild Alaskan Company, delicious, sustainably sourced seafood delivered right to your door. More information at wildalaskancompany.com/Tom. And Mack Weldon, reinventing men's basics. More info at mackweldon.com/Tom.
We say fight back!